My name is Isabella Garcia. I was 32 years old when my parents forged my signature to sell the 40-acre farm my grandmother left only to me. They did not just try to list it. They brought in a corporate developer, signed my name on a warranty deed, and waited for a $1.8 million wire transfer to hit their bank account. Grandma Rosa left that land to me 3 years ago because she knew my parents would liquidate it to fund my sister Olivia and her lavish lifestyle. I spent 3 years paying the property taxes, walking the fence lines, and keeping that acreage safe. My parents spent those 3 years waiting for an opportunity to steal it, and they would have gotten away with the theft if the title company had not picked up the phone to confirm the final wire routing number. What happened over the next 48 hours ended with my father wearing handcuffs at his own country club party. Welcome back to Vega Vengeance. If you have ever watched your family bend the rules to give the golden child everything while handing you nothing, you know the quiet anger of this story. Drop a comment below, tell me your age and where you are watching from, and make sure you subscribe. The call came at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. I work as a senior fraud investigator for a regional bank in Columbus, Ohio. My desk sits on the 4th floor overlooking the interstate. I was halfway through my second cup of black coffee, analyzing a stack of suspicious loan applications, when my cell phone vibrated against the wood veneer. The caller ID read, Apex Title Company. I answered. A woman named Sarah spoke. Her voice was cheerful, carrying the practiced warmth of someone closing a lucrative deal. She asked if she was speaking with Isabella Garcia. I said yes. She told me she was finalizing the escrow disbursement for the Hocking Hills property sale and just needed a verbal confirmation on the wire routing digits before pushing the $1.8 million to the recipient account. My fingers stopped hovering over my keyboard. The air in my office felt suddenly thin. Hocking Hills, 40 acres of dense oak trees and limestone creeks, the land Abuela Rosa left me. I had not listed the property. I had not spoken to a realtor. I kept my breathing even. Sarah, I said, keeping my voice level, what recipient account are you looking at? She read off the last 4 digits, 3802. Hector and Diane Garcia's joint checking account. My parents. I did not yell. In my line of work, panic is a liability. Instead, I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and stared at the gray carpet. I asked Sarah to email me the signed warranty deed for standard verification. She agreed, eager to wrap up her morning. 2 minutes later, an encrypted PDF arrived in my inbox. I opened the file. There it was. My full legal name, Isabella Sofia Garcia, signed in blue ink at the bottom of page 4. The loop of the G and the sharp cross of the T looked identical to my handwriting. It was a perfect forgery. But the date next to the signature caught my eye, October 12th. I opened my digital calendar. On October 12th, I was sitting in a windowless conference room at the Palmer House in Chicago, attending a 3-day banking summit. I had hotel receipts, flight manifests, and biometric badge swipes proving I was 300 miles away from any Ohio notary public. Sarah cleared her throat on the other end of the line. Does everything look correct, Ms. Garcia? No, Sarah, I replied. The transaction is fraudulent. I am the sole title holder and I did not sign that document. Freeze the escrow account immediately. Sarah stopped breathing. The cheerful customer service tone vanished. I could hear the faint click of a pen dropping onto a desk somewhere in her office. She stammered out a protocol response about contacting her legal department. I told her I would be filing a formal injunction before noon. I ended the call and placed my phone face down on the desk. My parents had conspired to strip my inheritance, forged a legal document, and nearly walked away with almost $2 million. As I sat there processing the weight of their betrayal, the screen of my phone lit up with a text message. It was from my mother. The text read, "Hi, sweetie. Dad and I are taking the family out to Il Sogno tonight for a special celebratory dinner. Olivia has some wonderful news to share. See you at 7. I stared at the glowing screen. The celebratory dinner was a stage play, a carefully constructed performance designed to mask the exact moment they stole my inheritance. They thought the money was already moving. I picked up my phone and typed a 2-word reply. See you there. I arrived at Il Sogno 10 minutes late. The restaurant occupied a prime corner in the Arena District, known for dim lighting, imported marble floors, and entrees that cost more than a tank of gas. The hostess guided me to a corner booth. My family was already seated. The air around our table was thick with the scent of my mother's signature gardenia perfume. It was a heavy, suffocating floral smell that always preceded her demands. My father, Hector, sat next to her. He wore a navy blazer and drummed his fingers against the mahogany table. Across from them sat my younger sister Olivia and her husband Mason. Olivia wore a silk emerald blouse, her posture radiating an unearned triumph. Mason wore his standard uniform, a fleece vest over a designer t-shirt. He had spent the last 5 years launching 3 different tech startups. All 3 had quietly folded, burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars in seed money. Yet tonight, he held a $40 glass of Barolo wine like a conquering hero. I slid into the leather booth. Nobody stood up to greet me. My mother offered a tight, practiced smile. She waved a manicured hand toward the waiter, signaling for another bottle of vintage red. "We have incredible news," Diane announced before I even opened a menu. She placed her hand over Olivia's. "Tell her, sweetheart." Olivia leaned forward. Her eyes gleamed with the specific kind of joy reserved for people who believe they have finally outsmarted everyone else. "Mason and I are in contract on a house," she said. "It is a $1.2 million estate in Dublin. 5 bedrooms, a custom chef kitchen, and a heated saltwater pool." I looked at her. Dublin was one of the wealthiest suburbs in the state. I knew Mason did not have a regular paycheck, and Olivia worked a few hours a week at a boutique fitness studio. "That is quite a purchase," I said. My voice remained flat, revealing nothing. "How are you handling the financing?" Mason puffed out his chest, setting his wine glass down. "We are putting down $400,000 in cash. We had a sudden windfall from my new investors. They really believe in my latest platform. They wanted to ensure my family was stable while I build the infrastructure." I looked down at my water glass. The ice cubes clinked softly against the crystal. My mind, trained to detect financial anomalies, ran the math with brutal speed. The forged warranty deed for Abuela Rosa's farm listed the sale price at $1.8 million. If my parents routed those funds into their joint checking account, they would owe federal and state capital gains taxes, plus realtor commissions and title fees. After the government took its share, the net payout would hover around $1.3 million. Extracting $400,000 in cash for Olivia's down payment would leave my parents with nearly $1 million to quietly absorb into their own accounts. The math was pristine. The lie about Mason's fictional investors was just the designated cover story. They were sitting across from me, drinking expensive Italian wine, celebrating the successful theft of my inheritance. "Congratulations," I said. I picked up my fork and tasted the truffle risotto the waiter had just placed in front of me. The flavor turned to ash in my mouth, but I chewed slowly. I kept my eyes fixed on my father. "How is the insurance agency doing, Dad?" I asked. Hector flinched. The question was a simple one, but guilt makes every inquiry feel like an interrogation. He grabbed his cloth napkin and dabbed at his upper lip. He avoided my gaze, staring instead at the bread basket. "Oh, you know," Hector muttered. "The market is tough right now. Premiums are rising, clients are shopping around. But we manage. We always manage." He reached for his water, and I noticed a slight tremor in his hand. The water rippled inside his glass. Hector had never been a good liar. Diane was the architect of the family deception, but Hector was the anxious contractor forced to build it. He knew the title company was supposed to wire the funds today. He did not know that I had frozen the escrow account 3 hours ago. He was waiting for a bank notification that would never arrive. Diane noticed his trembling hands. She swiftly intervened, steering the conversation back to safer territory. She spent the next 45 minutes detailing the imported quartz countertops Olivia had selected for the new kitchen. She described the landscaping plans and the neighborhood association rules. I sat there in silence. I did not interrupt. I just watched them. I watched the golden child plan a future funded by my stolen property. I watched my mother bask in the glow of her own manipulation. I watched my father sweat through his expensive jacket. When the waiter brought the leather check folio, he set it in the center of the table. The bill was nearly $500. Hector reached for his breast pocket. He patted his jacket. Then he patted his trousers. A theatrical look of distress washed over his face. Diane gasped, clapping a hand to her cheek. "Oh, no," she said. "Hector, did you leave your wallet in the other jacket?" She turned to me, her expression a perfect mask of helpless apology. "Isabella, sweetheart, could you possibly cover this?" "We rushed out of the house so quickly to celebrate. We will transfer the money to you tomorrow." The audacity was a living thing. They had forged my signature to steal nearly $2 million, and now they expected me to buy the dinner they organized to celebrate the theft. Olivia looked at me with a smirk. Mason picked his teeth with a plastic toothpick. They were waiting for me to argue. They were waiting for me to act like the bitter, jealous older sister they had always painted me to be. I reached into my purse. I pulled out my corporate credit card and placed it on top of the receipt. "Do not worry about the transfer," I said. "Consider it a parting gift." Diane smiled, entirely missing the weight of my words. "You are always so reliable, Isabella." "Thank you." The waiter processed the payment. I signed the merchant copy, leaving a generous tip for the staff, and stood up from the booth. I did not offer hugs. I did not say goodbye. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool Ohio night air. The streetlights reflected off the damp pavement. I unlocked my sedan and climbed into the driver's seat. I did not start the engine right away. I sat in the quiet dark of my vehicle. The family dinner had confirmed the motive, the distribution of funds, and the timeline. But to dismantle their operation, I needed the physical mechanics of the fraud. I needed the paper trail. I opened my laptop, resting it against the steering wheel. I connected to my mobile hotspot and bypassed the public portal of the county recorder database using my bank investigator credentials to access the raw escrow files. I needed to see exactly who stamped that forged warranty deed. Someone with a state license had to verify my fake signature. Someone had to put their official seal on that document, and whoever that notary was, they were the weak link in my parents' armor. I typed the parcel number into the search bar and pressed enter. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated the dark interior of my sedan. Sitting in the parking lot of the Italian restaurant, I navigated the county recorder digital portal. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. I bypassed the standard public search feature and utilized my bank investigator credentials to pull the raw, unprocessed escrow file for the Hocking Hills parcel. The system took a few seconds to load the heavy encrypted documents. When the file opened, I scrolled directly past the property boundaries, the tax assessment histories, and the buyer information. I needed to see the warranty deed. Page 4 appeared on my screen. There was my forged signature, rendered in bright blue ink. But my eyes shifted away from the fake handwriting and locked onto the bottom left corner of the paper. I needed to find the official seal. Someone had to verify that I was physically present in the room, handing over my identification and signing away my inheritance. There it was, a crisp black ink stamp pressed firmly against the paper. The text inside the rectangular border read, "Brenda Collins, Commissioned Notary Public, State of Ohio." My breath hitched just for a fraction of a second. Brenda Collins was not a random administrative clerk at a downtown bank. Brenda was my mother's bridge partner. She was the woman who brought a bowl of potato salad to my high school graduation party. More importantly, Brenda had been the front desk secretary at my father's independent insurance agency for 15 years. The scope of the betrayal crystallized in my mind. This was not just Hector and Diane sitting at a kitchen table practicing my signature on a scrap of paper. They had utilized an employee. They had leveraged their authority over a subordinate to execute a coordinated theft. By applying that black stamp to a fraudulent document, Brenda had escalated a quiet family dispute into a severe state felony. Falsifying a jurat carries a penalty of up to 5 years in a state penitentiary. My parents had risked their loyal secretary's freedom to secure a down payment for my sister. I closed the laptop, placed it on the passenger seat, and drove back to my apartment. The streets of Columbus blurred past the windshield. My mind categorized the variables organizing the incoming data the same way I mapped out corporate embezzlement schemes. Confronting my parents tonight would be a tactical error. Diane would deny everything, Hector would panic, and they would immediately call the title company to withdraw the transaction before I could secure the evidence. I needed to let them believe the theft was still in motion. I needed to trap the weakest link. And the weakest link was currently sitting behind a reception desk at an insurance office. I unlocked the door to my apartment. The space was quiet, organized, and entirely my own. I walked straight to my home office, turned on the overhead lamp, and opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I pulled out a heavy black leather portfolio. It had heavy-duty steel rings and thick protective sleeves. In the fraud division, we call this the master file. Tonight, I was building my own personal binder of destruction. I started with the alibi. If Brenda claimed I sat in her office in Ohio on October 12th to sign a deed, I needed to prove my physical body was 300 miles away. I logged into my corporate travel portal. I printed my Delta Airlines boarding passes, showing a departure from Columbus to Chicago on October 10th and a return flight on October 14th. Next, I accessed my digital hotel folio from the Palmer House in downtown Chicago. I printed the itemized receipt. It showed a $12 charge for sparkling water from room service at 2:15 in the afternoon on October 12th. That was the exact hour Brenda stamped the deed. To make the timeline impenetrable, I logged into my conference dashboard. The banking summit utilized biometric badge scanners to track attendee continuing education credits. I downloaded the security log. It displayed my name, my badge ID, and a digital timestamp proving I scanned into a fraud prevention seminar in a Chicago ballroom at 2:10 in the afternoon. I took the printed pages, aligned the edges, perfectly punched 3 holes down the side, and snapped them into the heavy steel rings of the leather binder. The paper trail was flawless. It was cold, hard, mathematical proof of a felony. I sat down at my desk and opened a blank legal template on my computer. I began typing an affidavit of forgery. I did not use emotional language. I used the sterile, clinical vocabulary of the justice system. I listed my legal name, the parcel identification number of Abuela Rosa's farm, and a sworn declaration that I had never relinquished title rights. I typed a specific clause stating the notary seal applied by Brenda Collins was obtained through fraudulent means. I printed the document and placed it in the front pocket of the binder. My cell phone vibrated on the edge of the desk. The screen illuminated with a notification from Instagram. It was a new story upload from my sister Olivia. I tapped the alert. The video began playing. Olivia was walking through the foyer of the Dublin estate she had just bragged about at dinner. The camera panned across gleaming Brazilian hardwood floors, soaring vaulted ceilings, and a massive marble fireplace. Her high heels clicked against the pristine wood. She flipped the camera around to show her face. She wore a smug, satisfied grin. Text overlaid the bottom of the video in an elegant font. The caption read, "Generational wealth moves." She was touring a mansion purchased with the stolen equity of the grandmother who warned me never to trust her. Olivia truly believed she was untouchable. She believed the money was already routed, the title was clear, and her new, wealthy lifestyle was secured. I took a screenshot of the video. I routed the image to my wireless printer. I listened to the mechanical hum of the machine dispensing the glossy page. I picked up the paper, punched 3 holes in the side, and snapped the photograph into the binder right behind the biometric security logs. Let her have the internet likes tonight. The physical evidence sitting on my desk held the real power. I was preparing to turn off my computer and get a few hours of sleep when a new email arrived in my secure banking portal. It was a high-priority message from Sarah at Apex Title Company. I clicked the subject line. Sarah had attached the buyer profile and the preliminary site preparation memos, asking me to review them for my impending injunction. I opened the buyer profile first. I had assumed my parents sold the farm to a local family or a small private investor. I was wrong. The listed purchaser was Titan Development. My stomach tightened. Titan Development was a massive corporate entity known for buying up rural acreage, leveling the timber, and constructing sprawling, high-density luxury subdivisions. They did not wait for the ink to dry before moving their assets. I opened the attached site preparation memo. The logistics report detailed the scheduled mobilization of heavy equipment. Because my parents had assured Titan the title was clear and the wire transfer was processing today, the developers had already dispatched their crews. The document stated that 3 commercial bulldozers and a logging team had been moved to the edge of the Hocking Hills property line. They were scheduled to begin clearing Abuela Rosa's ancient oak trees at dawn. The quiet, methodical investigation I had planned for the rest of the week evaporated. Gathering evidence against my parents and securing Brenda's confession was no longer my only priority. If I did not physically intercept that construction crew by sunrise, the corporate machines would tear apart the only piece of my grandmother I had left to protect. The legal paperwork could stop the financial transfer, but it could not unearth a 100-year-old oak tree once it was cut down. I checked my watch. It was nearing midnight. Dawn was 6 hours away. I closed the leather binder, picked up my car keys, and prepared to drive into the dark. The drive south on Route 33 took just over an hour. I left the streetlights of Columbus behind, trading the concrete grid of the city for the winding 2-lane roads of the Appalachian foothills. The sky was still black, hovering in that quiet space just before dawn. The heater in my sedan hummed, pushing warm air against the chill radiating from the glass windshield. Hocking Hills is defined by its deep sandstone gorges, limestone cliffs, and towering canopies of old-growth timber. Abuela Rosa purchased this specific 40-acre parcel 4 decades ago. She bought it with cash saved meticulously from years of sewing piecework and double shifts at a local bakery. My father, Hector, always resented her for that land. He viewed the acreage as trapped capital. Throughout my childhood, he begged her to let him leverage the property as collateral for his various failing business ventures. She always refused. She knew his appetite for fast money would eventually consume her life savings. When she passed away, she bypassed him entirely in her will, transferring the deed directly to me. She knew I would protect the trees. She knew he would sell them to the highest bidder. I turned off the paved highway and onto the gravel access road leading to the property line. The crunch of the tires broke the early morning silence. As I rounded the final bend, the scent of morning dew and pine needles was abruptly replaced by the harsh, metallic odor of burning diesel fuel. They were already here. 3 yellow Caterpillar bulldozers sat idling near the edge of the tree line. Their exhaust pipes spewed gray smoke into the crisp air. A heavy-duty flatbed truck carrying thick logging chains and steel cables was parked near a makeshift staging area. Bright orange plastic surveying tape had been stapled to the trunks of several ancient oak trees, marking them for immediate destruction. I did not pull over onto the shoulder. I pressed my foot against the accelerator and drove my sedan straight down the center of the access path. I maneuvered my vehicle directly in front of the lead bulldozer, turning the steering wheel sharply to angle my car across the dirt track. I shifted into park and cut the engine. My sedan now formed a horizontal barrier of steel and glass, physically blocking the heavy machinery from advancing into the forest. I picked up my leather binder from the passenger seat, unbuckled my seatbelt, and stepped out into the cold mud. A man wearing a neon safety vest and a white hard hat detached himself from a group of workers. He marched toward me, holding a metal clipboard. His posture was rigid with irritation. He looked at my tailored slacks, my wool trench coat, and my blocked sedan, clearly registering me as a civilian nuisance. "Lady, you need to move that vehicle, right now," the foreman barked, his voice straining over the low rumble of the diesel engines. "This is an active commercial work zone. You are violating safety protocols." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his volume. I closed the distance between us, stopping exactly 3 feet away from his boots. I opened my leather binder to the first page. I am Isabella Garcia, one stated. Maintaining direct eye contact. I am the sole legal owner of this parcel. You are currently trespassing on private property. If those steel blades touch a single branch of my timber, I will have local law enforcement arrest your entire crew, and I will file federal charges against your employer for the willful destruction of private assets. The foreman stopped walking. The irritation on his face fractured, replaced by sudden caution. He looked down at the documents, illuminated by the headlights of his truck. I handed him a certified copy of the original warranty deed, watermarked and stamped from 3 years ago. I then held up my corporate fraud investigator badge, letting the silver shield catch the light. I do not know who authorized your work order, I continued, my tone clinical and flat. But they sold you stolen goods. Call your legal department. The foreman swallowed hard. He handed the deed copy back to me, pulled a heavy 2-way radio from his belt, and signaled for his operators to cut the engines. The mechanical roaring died away, leaving only the sound of the wind moving through the upper branches of the oaks. He walked a few paces away and dialed a number on his cell phone. 10 minutes later, my own phone vibrated inside my coat pocket. The incoming number belonged to a corporate exchange. I swiped the screen to accept the call. Ms. Garcia, a man said. His voice was sharp, coated in the expensive arrogance of a partner at a downtown law firm. I am lead counsel for Titan Development. My site manager informs me you are interfering with our contracted land clearing. Let me be very clear. We hold a signed, notarized warranty deed. If you do not move your vehicle immediately, we will sue you for breach of contract, and we will hold you personally liable for every hour of labor delay. I listened to his threat without interrupting. Corporate lawyers often use bluster to gauge the vulnerability of their opponent. I was not vulnerable. Counselor, I replied, matching his crisp cadence. You are holding a fraudulent contract. The signature on your warranty deed was forged on October 12th. I was physically located in a windowless conference room in Chicago at the exact moment your notary claimed I was in Ohio. I have the biometric security logs, the flight manifests, and the sworn affidavit of forgery sitting in my passenger seat. The lawyer paused. The breathing on the other end of the line slowed. Furthermore, I said, driving the final stake into his position. By noon today, I am walking into the county courthouse to file a lis pendens on this parcel. In the realm of commercial real estate, those 2 Latin words are a death sentence. A lis pendens is a formal notice of pending legal action. The moment it is filed, it attaches a severe cloud to the property title. A clouded title means no underwriter will issue title insurance. Without title insurance, no financial institution will authorize the funding for a $1.8 million acquisition. The entire transaction is paralyzed instantly. You file a lis pendens, the lawyer warned, his voice losing its swagger and dropping into a tight, cautious register, and you freeze this deal indefinitely. That is the intended objective, I confirmed. You wired your earnest money to thieves. I highly recommend you review the seller names on your purchase agreement and redirect your aggression toward the individuals who actually defrauded your firm. I ended the call. I looked up. The foreman was waving his arm in a wide, sweeping arc. The logging crew began tossing their steel chains back onto the flatbed trailer. The operators climbed down from the bulldozers. They were packing up. Titan Development knew better than to sink resources into a poisoned asset. The forest was safe. I walked back to my sedan and slid behind the steering wheel. I placed the leather binder on the passenger seat and exhaled, watching the heavy machinery slowly reverse down the gravel path, retreating toward the highway. The quiet of the morning returned, leaving the ancient oaks standing tall and undisturbed against the pale gray sky. Before I could shift the car into drive, my phone illuminated again. The screen flashed with an incoming call. Hector Garcia. I watched his name pulse on the glass. He was calling early. Titan Development must have contacted him the second their lawyer hung up with me. The corporate beast he tried to feed had just turned its jaws toward him. I let the phone ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Then a frantic text message appeared. "Isabella, call me right now. Emergency with the bank." He was panicking. The ground beneath his feet was collapsing, and the $1.8 million windfall was evaporating into thin air. But the true beauty of his panic was his ignorance. He still believed the title company had simply encountered a minor clerical error. He believed his dutiful, reliable older daughter could be manipulated into fixing it for him. He did not know that the error was me. He did not know I held the master switch to his destruction. I ignored his fifth incoming call. I put the car in gear and steered back toward the highway. Before I could address my father, I needed to secure the final piece of leverage. I needed to pay a visit to a certain insurance office, and I needed to have a very pointed conversation with Brenda, the notary. I left the gravel access road behind and merged back onto the paved highway. The digital clock on my dashboard read 8:45. The morning sun was finally breaking through the cloud cover, casting long shadows across the Ohio farmland. My cell phone, resting in the center console, vibrated continuously. The screen displayed 9 missed calls from Hector. By the time I reached the Columbus city limits, the number had climbed to 12. I kept the phone on silent. Let him sweat. Let him dial until his fingers cramped. He was burning through his adrenaline, while I was carefully preserving mine. I navigated my sedan into a sprawling suburban strip mall on the north side of the city. I parked in front of a brick facade with gold lettering etched across the glass door. It read, Garcia Independent Insurance Agency. This was my father's domain, a mid-level regional brokerage that sold auto, home, and life policies to middle-class families. It was an unremarkable business, sustained largely by my mother's social networking at the country club, rather than any real financial acumen on Hector's part. I picked up my leather binder, stepped out of the car, and pushed open the glass door. The lobby smelled of stale coffee ozone from the copy machine and cheap vanilla air freshener. Behind the faux mahogany reception desk sat Brenda Collins. She wore a powder blue cardigan over a floral blouse. Brenda had been the front desk secretary for 15 years. She was my mother's dedicated bridge partner on Thursday afternoons. She was the woman who baked a pecan pie for every family holiday and mailed me a card on my birthday. She was not a criminal mastermind. She was a compliant enabler, a woman whose loyalty to my parents blinded her to the basic boundaries of the law. She represented the banality of suburban fraud. People like Brenda never believe they are committing a felony. They believe they are just doing a favor for a friend. She looked up from her computer monitor, her hands hovering over the keyboard. A practiced customer service smile formed on her lips. When she registered my face, the smile faltered, replaced by a look of mild confusion. "Isabella," she said, her voice bright but hesitant. "What a surprise. Your dad is not in the office yet. He called and said he was dealing with a banking issue this morning." I did not offer a greeting. I did not ask about her weekend. I walked directly to the reception counter and placed my heavy leather binder flat on the glass surface. I flipped the cover open. "I am not here to see Hector," I said. My voice was low, carrying the sterile, unyielding tone I used in bank interrogation rooms. "I am here to see you, Brenda." I pulled a single sheet of paper from the binder and slid it across the glass. It was not the deed. It was a customized spreadsheet I had generated in my home office. It was organized into 4 precise columns. Column A listed the Ohio Revised Code statutes. Column B detailed the legal classifications. Column C displayed the mandatory minimum sentences. Column D outlined the financial penalties. Brenda looked down at the grid. Her eyes tracked the highlighted row. Ohio Revised Code Section 147.14, falsifying a jurat. Classification felony of the 5th degree. Penalty up to 5 years in a state penitentiary and a fine of $10,000. "What is this?" she whispered. Her fingers twitched, pulling away from the document, as if the paper itself might burn her. I reached into my trench coat pocket and retrieved a sleek digital voice recorder. I placed it next to the spreadsheet, pressed the red activation button, and watched the tiny crimson indicator light begin to blink. On October 12th at 2:15 in the afternoon, you applied your state commission notary seal to a warranty deed, transferring 40 acres of my property to Titan Development. I stated, ensuring the microphone captured every syllable. You stamped a signature, claiming I was sitting in this room providing you with government identification. I was attending a banking seminar in Chicago. I have the biometric security logs, the flight manifests, and the hotel receipts. I can prove beyond a shadow of a legal doubt that you falsified a state document to facilitate a $1.8 million theft. The color drained from Brenda's face. The powder blue cardigan suddenly looked 2 sizes too large for her shoulders. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked at the blinking red light, then at the spreadsheet, and finally up at my eyes. She searched my expression for the little girl she used to know, the daughter who politely ate her pecan pie. She found nothing but a fraud investigator staring back at her. I am giving you one chance to explain the mechanics of this transaction, I said, before I hand this binder to the district attorney. She crumbled. It took less than 3 minutes. The facade of the loyal family friend disintegrated into raw, trembling panic. Tears spilled over her lower lashes, tracing dark tracks of mascara down her cheeks. Her breathing grew shallow and erratic. "Isabella, please," she sobbed, pressing her hands against her face. "I did not know they were stealing from you. Diane swore to me that you knew all about the sale." "Keep your hands on the desk, Brenda," I instructed calmly. "Speak clearly into the device. Who presented the document to you?" "It was your dad," she stammered, her voice shaking. Hector brought the paperwork into the office. He already had the signature on the line. "He told me you came by the house the night before and signed it. He said you verbally agreed to the sale, but you were just too busy at the bank to come down here during business hours to do the official stamp." "And my mother?" I prompted. "Diane called me that same morning," Brenda confessed, wiping her nose with the back of her wrist. "She said the money was staying in the family to help Olivia buy her new house. She said you were thrilled for your sister. They told me the notary stamp was just a silly technicality, just a piece of red tape preventing Olivia from getting her dream home. I believed them. I swear to you, I believed them. I did not want to cause trouble for your family." "You did not cause trouble," I corrected her. "You committed a felony." I reached into the binder and pulled out the legal affidavit of forgery I had drafted the night before. I slid it across the glass counter alongside a blue ink pen. "Sign this sworn statement," I said. "You will formally attest that Hector and Diane Garcia presented a pre-signed document and coerced you into applying your seal under false pretenses. If you document their manipulation now, the state prosecutor might view you as a cooperating witness instead of a co-conspirator. If you refuse to sign, you will be named as the primary facilitator of the fraud." Brenda did not hesitate. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the pen. She scribbled her signature at the bottom of the page, the ink smearing slightly from a teardrop that landed on the margin. She was terrified, desperately throwing my parents to the wolves in order to save her own freedom. I pulled the affidavit back, checked the signature for legibility, and snapped the paper into the steel rings of my binder. I pressed the stop button on the digital recorder and returned it to my pocket. "Do not call them," I instructed. "Do not warn them. If Hector finds out I was here, any leniency you might receive will vanish." I turned my back on her quiet sobbing and walked out of the insurance agency. The morning air felt sharp and clean after the stale environment of the office. I had the confession. I had the mechanical proof of the forgery. I possessed the exact weapon needed to dismantle their entire operation. I unlocked my sedan, slid behind the wheel, and placed the binder on the passenger seat. The screen of my cell phone illuminated. It was the 14th incoming call from Hector. I took a slow, deep breath, regulating my heart rate. I swiped the screen and accepted the call. "Isabella," Hector shouted before I could even say hello. His voice was an octave higher than normal, breathless and frantic. "Thank God you answered. Listen to me. We have a massive emergency." I kept my tone light, injecting a note of mild curiosity. "What is wrong, Dad? You sound out of breath." It is a nightmare, he panted, the lies spilling out of him in a rushed, rehearsed torrent. The title company made a stupid mistake, a ridiculous clerical error. They froze an escrow account that handles some of my commercial insurance bonds. You know how these underwriters are, jumping at shadows over compliance glitches. Sarah at Apex Title said you flagged something on their end. You need to call her back right now and authorize the release. Just tell her it was a misunderstanding so they can push the funds through. I listened to him construct the narrative. It was a pathetic attempt at manipulation, relying entirely on the assumption that I was ignorant of the specific property involved. He was trying to conflate his business accounts with my inheritance, hoping I would rubber stamp the release without looking at the fine print. I stared at the signed confession secured in my leather binder. The silence stretched across the cellular connection. "Authorize the release of what funds, Dad?" I asked. The frantic energy on the other end of the line evaporated. A heavy, suffocating silence replaced his breathless rant. He heard the clinical precision in my voice. He realized I had not asked about his commercial insurance bonds. I had asked a specific, targeted question. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The script he had prepared was useless. I knew something. He did not know how much I knew, but he understood the trap was altering its shape. The lie he had just delivered was dead. It had to mutate. The silence on the line stretched tight. Hector realized his commercial insurance lie had failed. He could not bluff his way past my question. His breathing changed, shifting from frantic hyperventilation to a heavy defensive rhythm. When cornered, liars rarely confess. They pivot. They attempt to rewrite reality so their transgression looks like an act of nobility. "Okay, fine," Hector snapped, his voice dropping the panicked facade and adopting a patronizing edge. "It is the Hocking Hills property. But you need to understand the context here, Isabella. Your grandmother was not thinking clearly at the end. She meant to leave that land to Olivia. We all knew that. Olivia is the younger sister. She needed the foundation. Abuela Rosa just forgot to update the paperwork before her health declined. We are just correcting a legal oversight." I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, listening to him rationalize a felony. "You corrected a legal oversight by forging my signature, coercing your secretary into falsifying a state document, and attempting to steal $1.8 million, I stated. "It is not stealing if the money belongs to the family," Hector argued, his tone rising with indignation. "You are being selfish. You have a corporate salary. Olivia and Mason need this capital to secure their future. You are putting a piece of paper above your own flesh and blood. Just call the title company and tell them you authorize the transfer. Be the bigger person for once in your life." I did not argue. Arguing with a manipulator is like wrestling in mud. You both get dirty, and the manipulator enjoys it. "Do not call my phone again, Hector," I said. I pressed the end call button. I tossed the device onto the passenger seat next to the leather binder. I put the car in gear and drove straight to my bank headquarters downtown. My fraud investigator instincts were now fully awake. In the Financial Crimes Division, we operate on a specific principle. Criminals do not wake up one morning and decide to execute a $2 million real estate forgery as their very first offense. High-level theft requires a psychological warm-up. It requires practice. If my parents possessed the moral flexibility to steal the farm, they had likely tested their boundaries earlier. They had to have a precursor. I walked into my office, locked the door, and woke up my dual monitors. I bypassed my current case files and opened the archival database. I needed to run a deep forensic audit on the estate of Rosa Garcia. My grandmother lived in a modest, single-story ranch house in Bexley for 40 years. She paid off her mortgage in the late 90s. She lived on a fixed pension and Social Security, clipping coupons and growing her own vegetables. She was notoriously suspicious of credit. She never carried a balance. I pulled her property history, the screen populated with decades of standard tax payments and utility disbursements. But as my eyes scanned the records from her final year of life, a glaring anomaly jumped off the screen. 6 months before she died, a home equity line of credit was originated against her Bexley house. I leaned closer to the monitor. The principal draw was $150,000. My heart beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I remembered that specific time period vividly. Rosa had suffered a minor stroke. Hector and Diane had taken over her medical directives and her finances, claiming she was too frail to manage the paperwork. They told the family that Rosa required specialized in-home nursing care, which was incredibly expensive. They claimed they had to take out a small loan against her house to cover the medical bills insurance refused to pay. I was an entry-level analyst at the time, drowning in my own student debt, and I took them at their word. I pulled the disbursement ledger for the equity line. I needed to see the exact routing numbers. I needed to see which healthcare agency received the funds. The digital document loaded. The $150,000 did not go to a medical provider. It did not go to a nursing service, a pharmacy, or a physical therapy clinic. The money was wired in a single lump sum transfer to a commercial checking account. I copied the receiving routing digits and ran them through the Federal Employer Identification Database. The system thought for 3 seconds before displaying the registered corporate entity. Nexus Solutions, LLC. I stared at the name. Nexus Solutions was the second tech startup launched by Mason. It was a digital marketing platform that produced zero revenue and quietly dissolved 18 months after inception. The reality of the numbers hit me with a physical weight. My parents did not just forge a deed after Rosa died. They had actively drained her home equity while she was still breathing, feeding her life savings directly into their son-in-law's failing business to artificially prop up the golden child's lifestyle. A memory surfaced, sharp and stinging. I was sitting at Rosa's kitchen table 5 months before she passed away. The house smelled of lavender soap and old paper. I watched my grandmother take her carvedilol heart medication. She placed the tiny white pill on a cutting board and used a razor blade to slice it perfectly in half. When I asked her why, she smiled a sad, tired smile and told me the copay had gone up and she needed to stretch the prescription until her next pension check arrived. 2 weeks after I watched her split that pill, my family held a summer barbecue. Mason and Olivia pulled up to the driveway in a brand new, custom-ordered Tesla Model S. They bragged about the acceleration. They bragged about the leather interior. Hector and Diane beamed with pride, telling the neighbors that Mason's business was booming. They bought that car with the money my grandmother needed to keep her heart beating. The conflict was no longer a simple real estate dispute. This was not just property theft. It was elder financial abuse. It was a calculated, parasitic extraction of resources from a vulnerable senior citizen. My parents had sacrificed Rosa's dignity, her comfort, and her security to fund a charade. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the heavy hole punch. I printed the origination documents for the home equity line. I printed the wire transfer receipt showing the routing to Nexus Solutions. I printed the corporate registration listing Mason as the primary beneficiary. I punched the holes and snapped the pages into the binder. The portfolio was growing thicker. The narrative it contained was turning darker. The state felony of falsifying a notary jurat was severe, but elder financial exploitation opened an entirely different category of justice. The penalties involved asset forfeiture and mandatory restitution. I sat back in my chair and looked at the black leather cover of the binder. I had the tools to destroy them. The forged deed stopped the farm sale, but the home equity theft was the weapon that would dismantle their entire foundation. Before I could draft the next legal summary, my cell phone vibrated on the desk. I expected to see Hector's name again. I expected another frantic attempt at damage control. But the incoming notification was not a phone call. It was a barrage of text messages. The alerts stacked up on my screen, one after another, buzzing like an angry hive. I unlocked a device and opened my messaging application. The notifications were pouring in from the Garcia Extended Family Group chat. A thread containing 22 aunts, uncles, and cousins. A chat that usually sat dormant, reserved for holiday greetings and baby announcements. Diane had taken the offensive. Realizing that Hector had failed to manipulate me, and knowing the $1.8 million wire was stalled, my mother decided to deploy her ultimate weapon: public humiliation. If she could not control me in private, she would assassinate my character in front of the entire bloodline. She was attempting to isolate me, turning the family into a weaponized jury. I tapped the screen and opened the thread. The smear campaign had officially begun, and a new, highly visible threat was stepping into the arena. The Garcia extended family group chat, titled Familia First, buzzed incessantly on my desk. For the last 2 years, I had kept the thread muted, occasionally scrolling past endless photos of my cousin's toddlers or recipes for holiday tamales. Today, the chat was a targeted strike zone. My mother had initiated the bombardment at 11:45 in the morning, crafting a narrative designed to strip me of any sympathy and position herself as a grieving victim. I scrolled to the top of the unread messages. Diane had written a 4-paragraph essay. It was heavily sanitized, emotionally manipulative, and entirely devoid of facts. "It breaks my heart to share this," Diane typed. "We have always tried to treat our daughters equally, but Isabella has decided to hold the family hostage. As you all know, Abuela Rosa meant for the farm to go to Olivia to help her start her young family. We were just trying to honor Rosa's true wishes and finalize the sale. But Isabella is acting out of pure jealousy. She has a high-paying corporate job, yet she is using a legal loophole to extort her father and me, trying to demand a massive cut of the money. She is intentionally ruining Olivia's beautiful new home purchase. Please pray for her to find some compassion in her heart." The responses from the extended family were immediate and venomous. Aunt Maria replied, "I always knew she was cold, but extorting her own parents is disgusting." My cousin Mateo chimed in, "Corporate greed changes people. Isabella, you need to sign whatever they need and apologize. Do not be a parasite." Uncle Carlos added, "Rosa would be ashamed of you, Isabella. Stop punishing your sister just because she is happy." I read every message. I did not type a defense. I did not engage in digital combat. In fraud investigations, when a suspect realizes the documentary evidence is against them, they always attempt to shift the battleground to the court of public opinion. They rely on social pressure to force a settlement. My mother was counting on the sheer weight of family disapproval to break my resolve. She believed I would sign away my inheritance just to stop the notifications. I took screenshots of the entire thread. I captured Diane's false claim of extortion, Maria's insults, and Mateo's commands. I sent the images to my secure cloud folder and printed a hard copy. I punched 3 holes in the paper and added it to the leather binder. If my mother wanted to build a public record of her harassment, I was happy to file it into evidence. I closed the messaging application and returned my focus to my monitors. I needed to finish analyzing the routing data for the elder abuse funds. But before I could open the next ledger, my desk phone chimed. It was the internal line from the ground floor security desk. I picked up the receiver. "Garcia," I said. Ms. Garcia, the security guard, spoke, his voice tense. "We have a situation in the main lobby. A woman claiming to be your sister is here. She does not have an appointment. She is refusing to sign the visitor log, and she is causing a significant disturbance near the teller stations. She says if you do not come down immediately, she is going straight to Human Resources to file a formal complaint against you." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. Olivia had deployed herself as the physical escalation of Diane's digital smear campaign. My sister always thrived on theatrical confrontation. She believed volume equaled power. "Send an escort and have her wait near the elevator bank," I instructed the guard. "I will be down in 2 minutes." I locked my workstation, grabbed my security badge, and took the elevator to the ground floor. The bank lobby was a cavernous space of polished granite and high ceilings designed to project quiet institutional authority. Olivia was doing her best to shatter that quiet. She stood near the velvet ropes of the teller queue, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and carrying a leather handbag that cost more than a standard mortgage payment. She was gesturing sharply at a junior security officer. Several customers had stopped filling out deposit slips to watch the spectacle. I approached her with a slow, measured stride. My posture was straight, my expression neutral. "Olivia, I said, keeping my voice low enough that the echo did not carry across the marble floor. "This is a commercial banking environment. You are disrupting operations." Olivia spun around, ripping the sunglasses from her face. Her eyes were wide, flushed with a mix of genuine panic and performative rage. She had clearly been crying, but the tears had hardened into venom. "How dare you," she hissed, stepping into my personal space. "How dare you freeze the title? Mason and I are supposed to close on our house tomorrow. The sellers are threatening to keep our deposit. You are ruining my life over a technicality." "It is not a technicality," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "It is a $1.8 million forgery." She waved her hand dismissively, as if state felonies were nothing more than annoying traffic tickets. "You always have to be the victim. You have a great career. You do not even need that land. You are just doing this to punish me because Mom and Dad love me more." I looked at my younger sister. I looked past the expensive clothes and the carefully curated social media aesthetic. I saw a dependent, fragile adult who possessed zero financial literacy and survived entirely on stolen subsidies. "I am not punishing you, Olivia," I stated. "The justice system is going to handle the punishment. Your husband funded his failed business with Abuela Rosa's home equity while she rationed her heart medication." Olivia blinked. The accusation about the home equity line stalled her momentum, but only for a second. She did not possess the capacity for self-reflection. She doubled down on the aggression. "You are psychotic," she spat. "You are using your bank access to illegally stalk my family. I am going to march right upstairs to your HR director and tell them you are abusing corporate resources to harass us. I will have you fired by the end of the day. You will have nothing." I signaled to the two security guards standing a few feet away. They immediately stepped forward, positioning themselves on either side of my sister. "Escort this individual out of the building," I commanded the guards. "If she attempts to re-enter the premises, issue a formal trespass warning and contact the Columbus Police Department." The guards placed their hands firmly on her shoulders, guiding her toward the revolving glass doors. Olivia realized she had lost the engagement. She could not scream her way out of a corporate security protocol. But as they pushed her toward the exit, she dug her heels into the granite floor, turning her head to deliver one final, desperate threat. "You think you are so smart, Isabella," she yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You think you are just stopping my house. You do not even know what Dad did. He already took an advance on the land money. He used their house to secure the bridge loan. If this deal falls through, the bank seizes his property. You are going to make your own parents homeless." The revolving door swallowed her, cutting off the rest of her sentence. She was pushed out onto the busy downtown sidewalk, disappearing into the pedestrian traffic. I stood in the center of the lobby, the ambient noise of the bank slowly returning to normal. My heart hammered against my ribs. I maintained my composed exterior, nodding to the security guards in silent thanks, but my mind was racing. Dad already took an advance on the land money. He used their house to secure the bridge loan. Olivia, in her blind rage, had just handed me a critical piece of intelligence. My father was not just waiting for the $1.8 million wire to fund his retirement. He had leveraged his primary residence to extract cash before the closing date. This explained his hyperventilating panic on the phone. This explained why Diane was orchestrating a desperate smear campaign. They were not just trying to steal my asset. They were trying to save their own. I walked back to the elevator bank, swiped my security badge, and returned to my desk. I needed to verify Olivia's claim. I pulled the property records for Hector and Diane's suburban house. The search results loaded on my monitor. My sister was right, but her terminology was slightly inaccurate. It was not a standard bridge loan. A week ago, Titan Development, eager to lock in the purchase of the Hocking Hills farm, had offered the sellers a substantial earnest money deposit. Because corporate developers operate with immense liquidity, they often wire non-refundable deposits to secure prime acreage. I accessed the interbank transfer portal, utilizing a specialized tracing subpoena template I kept saved for priority investigations. I ran a query on Hector's joint checking account. There it was, 6 days ago, an incoming wire transfer from Titan Development hit my father's ledger. $100,000. My parents had received a six-figure cash deposit based entirely on the forged warranty deed. But the ledger did not stop there. The $100,000 did not sit in the account. Within 24 hours of receiving the Titan Development wire, Hector initiated an outgoing transfer. I traced the destination routing number. The money moved out of Ohio. It crossed the state border and landed in a commercial holding account registered in Delaware. I pulled the corporate filings for the Delaware Holding Company. The registered agent and sole beneficiary was Mason. My breathing slowed. The parameters of the investigation fundamentally shifted. By accepting a fraudulent real estate deposit and immediately wiring those funds across state lines to a separate corporate entity, Hector and Mason had crossed a terrifying legal threshold. This was no longer a state-level forgery issue. This was no longer just an elder abuse civil matter. By utilizing electronic banking infrastructure to move stolen money across state borders, my father and my brother-in-law had committed federal wire fraud. I reached for my desk phone. The leather binder on my desk was complete. The state authorities could handle the notary and the forged deed. But I needed a heavier hammer for the wire transfer. I needed a jurisdiction that did not negotiate with family drama. I dialed a direct number I had memorized during my early days as an investigator. I waited for the 3 rings. Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division, a voice answered. Special Agent Miller speaking. I looked at the glowing routing numbers on my screen. I had the exact coordinates of their destruction. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the faint static on the federal line. Special Agent David Miller and I had worked together 3 years ago on a complex corporate embezzlement ring. He possessed a dry, analytical mind that stripped the emotion out of financial crimes, breaking human greed down to its basic mathematical components. I told him I had uncovered a multi-state wire fraud case involving a forged real estate instrument, elder exploitation, and a stolen 6-figure corporate deposit. He asked for the preliminary routing numbers. I read them aloud from my monitor. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard as he typed the digits into his terminal. He whistled softly, a sharp intake of breath. He told me that my internal bank tracing was an excellent starting point, but to open a formal federal jacket, he required the records to be secured through an external legal apparatus. He could not base a federal warrant solely on my employee access portal. I understood the protocol perfectly. I needed a shark. I needed a litigator who operated outside the boundaries of my corporate banking restrictions to formalize the evidence. I ended the call with Miller, gathered my notes, and left the bank building on my lunch hour. I drove to the law offices of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a ruthless commercial real estate attorney known for dismantling fraudulent developers and crushing predatory lenders in open court. His office occupied the top floor of a glass tower in the Arena District, smelling of expensive espresso and polished mahogany. I sat in a sleek leather chair across from his sprawling desk and laid out my findings. I did not ask for his sympathy regarding my family drama. I asked for an expedited discovery subpoena. Marcus reviewed my internal traces in silence. His eyes narrowed as he followed the path of the forged warranty deed down to the Titan Development earnest money. He drafted the emergency subpoena within the hour, targeting Hector's specific financial institution and the Delaware Corporate Registry. Because I had already initiated the lis pendens against the Hocking Hills property, Marcus possessed the judicial leverage to compel the unredacted wire logs immediately. He filed the paperwork electronically using an emergency injunction protocol while I sat in his office and drank a glass of sparkling water. By late afternoon, the official, legally binding financial ledgers arrived via secure courier. I took the sealed documents back to my apartment and spread them across my kitchen island. The official records painted a devastating picture of my father's actions. The timestamps were precise and unforgiving. On a Tuesday at 9 a.m, Titan Development transmitted a non-refundable earnest money deposit of $100,000 to the joint checking account belonging to Hector and Diane Garcia. For 48 hours, the funds sat untouched, waiting for the fraudulent sale to close. Then, on Thursday at 11:15 in the morning, Hector initiated a domestic wire transfer. He did not keep the money in Ohio to pay his local debts. He routed $80,000 out of the state, directing the capital into the Delaware holding company registered exclusively to Mason. The nature of the crime had fundamentally evolved. Falsifying a notary jurat is a severe state offense handled by local county prosecutors. But the exact moment Hector pushed $80,000 of illicit funds across a state border using electronic banking infrastructure, he triggered federal jurisdiction. Wire fraud carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison per individual count. I opened a digital design program on my laptop. I did not want to hand Special Agent Miller a stack of confusing black and white spreadsheets. I wanted to hand him a weapon. I created a pristine, color-coded flowchart. At the top of the page, I placed a graphic of the forged warranty deed outlined in dark red. A heavy arrow pointed down to a box labeled Titan Development, symbolizing the deceived buyer. From Titan, a thick green line represented the $100,000 deposit flowing into Hector's personal checking account. From Hector's account, a sharp black arrow crossed a dotted line representing the state border, terminating in a solid box labeled Nexus Solutions Delaware LLC, the entity controlled entirely by Mason. I routed the schematic to my wireless printer using high-quality gloss paper. The visual representation of their greed was undeniable. It looked exactly like the money laundering structures I dismantled for my corporate clients on a weekly basis. I punched 3 holes in the gloss paper and snapped it into the heavy steel rings of my leather binder. The portfolio was no longer just a collection of grievances. It was a federal indictment waiting for a signature. I scanned the legally binding subpoena returns and the pristine flowchart into an encrypted digital file. I transmitted the package directly to Special Agent Miller. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Miller confirmed receipt of the documents. He stated the evidence was ironclad and ready for prosecution. The Financial Crimes Division was officially opening a preliminary case file on Hector Garcia and his son-in-law. The stakes had shifted from retaining a plot of farmland to surviving the federal justice system. My father and my sister's husband were now staring down the barrel of severe prison sentences. They had built their fragile, wealthy facade on a foundation of federal wire fraud, and I had just handed the FBI the match to burn it down. I ended the call with Miller feeling the cold reality of the impending legal strike settle into my bones. I needed a moment away from the screens and the ledgers. I walked down the hall of my apartment building to check my physical mail. My metal lockbox was stuffed with standard utility bills and grocery circulars. But nestled between the junk mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy in my hands, constructed from premium cardstock. My name and address were written across the front in elegant, sweeping gold calligraphy. I carried the envelope back into my kitchen and sliced the top open with a metal letter opener. A rigid, embossed invitation slid out onto the granite counter. The edges of the card were lined with gold foil that caught the overhead pendant lighting. I read the elegant script printed in the center of the card. You are cordially invited to an exclusive evening celebrating the future. Join us for the official startup launch of Nexus Solutions and the housewarming gala for Mason and Olivia. The event was scheduled for tomorrow evening. The location was the Oak Creek Country Club, a prestigious venue that required a 5-figure initiation fee just to walk through the mahogany front doors. I stared at the gold lettering, letting the sheer audacity of the invitation wash over me. Mason and Olivia were hosting a lavish, high society event to celebrate a tech business that produced zero revenue and a luxury estate they could not legally purchase. They were renting out an exclusive country club ballroom, hiring expensive caterers, and preparing to pour premium champagne for the local elite. And they were funding every single extravagant detail of the gala with the $80,000 they stole from my inheritance. They had mailed me an invitation to a party, paid for with my own money, likely sent days ago when they still believed the land sale was proceeding smoothly. The arrogance was staggering. But as I looked at the date and the location of the gala, a different thought began to form in my mind. Titan Development was demanding a clear title, and the $1.8 million wire was still frozen. Diane and Hector knew the deal was collapsing. They knew they needed my signature to release the funds and save themselves from the corporate lawyers. They would not wait for the party tomorrow night to confront me. They would try to force my hand before the closing deadline expired. I set the gold invitation next to my leather binder, knowing my mother was already planning her next move. The electric kettle on my kitchen counter hissed, sending a thin plume of steam toward the ceiling. I reached for a porcelain mug and dropped a chamomile tea bag inside. The aroma of dried flowers and honey began to fill the quiet space of my apartment. It was early evening, the sky outside my floor-to-ceiling windows turning a deep, bruised purple. The chime of my front doorbell broke the silence. I did not walk to the door immediately. I leaned over my kitchen island and tapped the screen of my smart home security monitor. The high-definition camera mounted in the hallway displayed 4 figures standing on my welcome mat. My mother stood at the front of the pack. She wore a dark cashmere wrap, her face arranged in a mask of manufactured sorrow. Flanking her were my Aunt Elena and my Uncle Carlos. Elena was Diane's younger sister, a woman who had spent her entire adult life seeking my mother's social approval. Carlos was Hector's older brother, a retired construction manager who viewed himself as the traditional enforcer of the Garcia family hierarchy. Behind them stood my Aunt Maria, the cousin who had called me a parasite in the group chat just a few hours earlier. Diane was not here to apologize. She was orchestrating an ambush. She had brought a physical audience to corner me in my own sanctuary. I tapped the secondary application on my control panel. It activated the interior security cameras mounted discreetly in the corners of my living room and kitchen. The lenses glowed with a faint, imperceptible blue light. The system began recording high-resolution video and crisp directional audio to a secure cloud server. I poured the boiling water into my mug, walked to the entryway, and opened the door. Diane did not wait for an invitation. She pushed past me, stepping into the foyer with a heavy sigh, her designer leather handbag clattering against her hip. Elena Maria and Carlos followed, their postures stiff and uncomfortable. They looked around my pristine, minimalist apartment as if searching for signs of squalor. Isabella, Diane began, her tone dripping with rehearsed maternal concern. "We are doing this because we love you. We are all deeply worried about your state of mind." I closed the front door, ensuring the deadbolt clicked into place. I walked back to the kitchen island, positioning myself behind the granite counter. The physical barrier created a clean line of separation between me and my intruders. I picked up my mug and let the warmth seep into my palms. "What concerns you, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice mild and inviting. Uncle Carlos stepped forward, crossing his thick arms over his chest. "Do not play games with your mother," he barked. "You caused a scene at your bank today. You humiliated your sister in public. You are obsessing over a piece of property that Rosa always meant for the younger generation. Your mother thinks you are having some kind of mental episode, a breakdown. And looking at your behavior, I agree with her." Aunt Elena nodded, twisting the strap of her purse. "You are acting out of pure jealousy, Isabella. It is not healthy. You need to let go of this anger before it destroys you." The strategy was textbook psychological manipulation. When an abuser cannot defeat the evidence, they attack the sanity of the accuser. They were staging a fake mental health intervention to frame my refusal to be robbed as a psychiatric crisis. Diane stepped up to the edge of the granite island. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila folder. She opened it and slid a single sheet of paper across the smooth stone surface. It stopped inches from my tea mug. "This is the cure," Isabella Diane said softly, leaning forward. "It is a retroactive quitclaim deed. It legally nullifies your interest in the Hocking Hills farm. If you sign this right now, the title clears. The tension vanishes. We can get you the psychiatric help you clearly need, and we can go back to being a happy, supportive family. Just sign it. Let go of the paranoia." I looked down at the document. A quitclaim deed offers no warranties. It simply transfers whatever interest the signer holds to the grantee. It was the exact legal instrument required to legitimize their previous forgery. If I applied my genuine signature to this page, The cloud on the title would evaporate. Titan Development would authorize the $1.8 million wire, and the federal wire fraud regarding the earnest money would be buried under the guise of a legitimate transaction. I did not touch the paper. I lifted my mug and took a slow, measured sip of the chamomile tea. I looked at the 4 expectant faces staring back at me. "Let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this intervention," I said, ensuring my voice was projected clearly toward the hidden microphone above the refrigerator. "You brought our extended relatives into my home tonight to cure my supposed mental breakdown, and the only prescribed treatment for my illness is my signature on this specific legal instrument." "Yes," Diane said, eagerly sensing weakness. "It is a symbolic release. You are letting go of the burden." I set the mug down. The ceramic clinked sharply against the granite. "So you want me to sign a document, releasing land I did not know was sold?" I asked, locking eyes with my mother. Diane stiffened, but Carlos grunted in annoyance. "Stop clinging to technicalities, Isabella. The land was sold. It is done." I ignored my uncle and kept my focus entirely on Diane. "I want to be absolutely clear." I continued, my tone dropping into the cold clinical register of a corporate interrogator. "You want me to surrender my legal rights to the farm in order to cover the $100,000 earnest money deposit your husband already received and spent?" Aunt Elena frowned, glancing sideways at her sister. "Earnest money? What are you talking about?" Diane's jaw tightened. She realized the script was deviating, but her arrogance, fueled by the presence of her siblings, pushed her to maintain dominance. She believed she held the numerical advantage in the room. She believed I would cower. "Yes, Diane," snapped, her facade of maternal concern fracturing, revealing the raw desperation beneath. "Because the money is already gone, Isabella. Hector used our primary residence to secure the bridge loan against that deposit. He wired the funds to Mason to secure the Dublin house. If you do not sign that paper tonight, the corporate buyer pulls out. Your father and I will face foreclosure. We will lose everything. You owe us this. You owe this family your compliance. Sign the deed and stop tearing us apart." The silence that followed her outburst was heavy and absolute. The ambient hum of the refrigerator seemed to amplify in the quiet room. I looked at Aunt Maria. Her mouth was slightly open. I looked at Uncle Carlos, his arms uncrossed, falling limply to his sides. They had arrived at my apartment believing they were confronting a hysterical, jealous spinster. Diane had fed them a story about honor and family unity. But Diane had just confirmed on high-definition audio and video that she was extorting her own daughter to cover up the misappropriation of commercial real estate funds and save her own house from foreclosure. The relatives were not financial experts, but they understood the ugly, desperate reality of what they had just heard. I reached across the counter and used my index finger to slide the quitclaim deed back toward my mother. "No," I said. Diane stared at the rejected document. The veins in her neck stood out in sharp relief. "You arrogant, ungrateful little girl." I picked up my tea. "You all need to leave my home. Now." Nobody argued. The shifting atmosphere in the room was palpable. Carlos refused to meet my eyes. Elena backed away toward the foyer, her face pale. They realized they had been drafted into a criminal conspiracy, positioned as unwitting accomplices in an extortion attempt. They had walked into the trap Diane set for me, and they were eager to escape before the jaws snapped shut on them as well. Diane snatched the folder off the counter, her hands shaking violently. She turned on her heel and marched toward the exit, followed closely by the silent, chastised relatives. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them. I stood alone in my kitchen. The tea was still warm. I walked over to the security panel, stopped the recording, and downloaded the encrypted file directly to my secure external drive. I now possessed high-resolution video evidence of my mother admitting to the theft of the Titan Development deposit, confirming the unauthorized transfer to Mason, and attempting to coerce my signature through coordinated intimidation. I returned to my home office and added a flash drive containing the video file to the front pocket of my leather binder. The portfolio was nearing completion. But as I sat down in my desk chair, my cell phone vibrated. It was not a text from an angry relative. It was a direct call from Marcus Thorne, my real estate attorney. I answered the line. Marcus did not bother with pleasantries. His voice was sharp, cutting straight to the core of the issue. Isabella, we have a compression in the timeline, Marcus stated. Titan Development just served your father's counsel with a formal notice of default. I straightened in my chair. What are the terms? They are losing patience with the clouded title, Marcus explained. The corporate buyer has issued a 48-hour ultimatum. If Hector cannot produce a legally binding, uncontested warranty deed by Thursday evening, Titan is withdrawing the $1.8 million purchase offer. That was expected, I replied. They will not wait around for family litigation. There is a secondary clause, Marcus continued, his tone darkening. Titan is not just walking away. If the title is not cleared in 48 hours, they are initiating a civil lawsuit against your father for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. They will demand the immediate return of the $100,000 earnest money deposit, plus punitive damages and attorney fees. I looked at the leather binder resting on my desk. The walls were closing in on Hector and Diane faster than they anticipated. They had 2 days to produce money they had already spent or face the wrath of a corporate legal department with unlimited resources. The fake intervention was their last desperate attempt to fix the problem quietly. Now they were standing on the edge of a financial cliff, and the corporate buyer was preparing to push them over. The 48-hour countdown established by Titan Development shifted the atmosphere from desperate to terminal. Corporate legal departments do not bluff. They operate on rigid schedules and profit margins. When they issue a notice of default with a specific deadline, they are preparing the paperwork for the subsequent lawsuit. Hector had 2 days to produce a clear title, or he would face a civil action that would strip him of his house, his insurance agency, and his remaining dignity. I ended the call with Marcus Thorne and sat in the quiet of my home office. The glow of the computer monitors illuminated the black leather binder resting on my desk. The fake intervention had failed. Diane's strategy of public humiliation had collapsed. They had no cards left to play. I knew what would happen next. When a cornered animal exhausts its options for intimidation, it resorts to pleading. I did not have to wait long. At 10:30 that night, my cell phone rang. The screen displayed my father's contact profile. I did not answer. I let the device buzz against the wood veneer until the call automatically rolled over to the digital answering service. A notification icon appeared on the screen, indicating a new voicemail message had been recorded. I tapped the icon, routed the audio output to my high-definition desk speakers, and pressed play. The audio began with the sound of ragged, wet breathing. Hector was weeping. It was not the theatrical, performative crying Diane utilized to manipulate an audience. This was the raw, humiliating sound of a man watching his life disintegrate. "Isabella, please pick up," Hector sobbed, his voice cracking on the syllables. "Your mother said you kicked her out." "You do not understand what is happening. Titan Development sent a letter to my lawyer. They are pulling the deal. They want the earnest money back by Thursday. I do not have it. I wired it to Mason for the Dublin house. If I cannot return those funds, Titan is going to sue me. They are going to take the house. They are going to take the agency. I will be bankrupt." He paused, a sharp intake of breath echoing through the speakers. The facade he had maintained for his entire adult life, the successful businessman, the providing patriarch, was gone. "I signed your name okay, Hector," confessed, the words tumbling out in a rushed, desperate stream. "I did it. I forged the deed. I brought it to Brenda and told her you agreed. I did it for your sister. Olivia needed the capital. Mason's investors fell through and they were going to lose the Dublin estate. You have a good job. You have a corporate salary and a pension plan. You do not need that land. Do not destroy your own family over a piece of dirt. Call the title company. Sign the release. I am begging you on my knees, Isabella. Please do not let me lose everything." The recording ended with a soft click, leaving the office in heavy silence. I sat motionless in my chair. He had just delivered the final nail. The video recording from the kitchen captured Diane admitting to extortion and the unauthorized wire transfer. But Hector's weeping voicemail was the direct, unassailable admission of the primary forgery. He stated in his own voice that he signed my name. He stated his motive. He confirmed his coercion of the notary. It was a flawless confession delivered directly to the victim. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I felt a cold, clinical satisfaction, the kind an architect feels when the final support beam of a structure is secured. I exported the audio file. I saved it to my encrypted cloud server, downloaded a copy to my external hard drive, and emailed a redundant copy to my secure corporate address. I then burned the audio file onto a physical flash drive and tucked it into the front pocket of the leather binder, right next to the video of Diane's intervention. The portfolio was complete. The evidence was overwhelming, multi-jurisdictional, and perfectly documented. The next morning, I requested a personal day from my bank supervisor. I wore a tailored navy suit and carried the leather binder under my arm. My first stop was the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office downtown. I did not wait in the public lobby. Marcus Thorne had arranged a private meeting with an assistant district attorney named Sarah Jenkins. She handled white-collar felonies and complex fraud rings. We sat in a sterile conference room overlooking the Scioto River. I slid the binder across the heavy wooden table. I walked her through the state-level offenses first. I presented the forged warranty deed, the biometric data proving my physical location in Chicago, and the sworn, signed confession from Brenda Collins detailing how Hector coerced her into applying the notary's seal. I then played the audio voicemail from my phone, letting Hector's weeping confession fill the small room. Jenkins listened intently, her eyes scanning the documents. She did not interrupt. When the voicemail ended, she closed the binder and rested her hands flat on the cover. "This is a pristine file," Ms. Garcia Jenkins stated, her tone professional and decisive. "We have direct admission of a 5th-degree felony regarding the jurat falsification and a 3rd-degree felony for grand theft regarding the attempted real estate transfer. We can secure an arrest warrant for Hector Garcia by the end of the day." "Do not file it yet," I countered, keeping my voice level. "There is a federal component." I pulled out the color-coded flowchart I had designed the day before, detailing the movement of the Titan Development earnest money. I laid it on top of the binder. The Titan deposit was secured using the forged state document I explained, pointing to the green arrow on the graphic. But Hector immediately routed $80,000 of those funds across state lines to a Delaware holding company controlled by his son-in-law, Mason. I have already forwarded the subpoenaed financial ledgers to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Jenkins raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine respect crossing her face. "You brought the feds into a family real estate dispute. It ceased being a family dispute the moment they committed wire fraud," I replied. I checked my watch. It was nearing 11 in the morning. "Special Agent Miller is reviewing the final wire logs now," I continued. "I would prefer if the state and federal authorities coordinated their apprehension protocols. If you arrest Hector today for the forgery, Mason might panic and attempt to move the Delaware funds offshore. We need to secure both targets simultaneously." Jenkins nodded slowly, understanding the tactical necessity. "Where are the targets located?" I reached into my blazer pocket and retrieved the heavy cream-colored envelope with the gold calligraphy. I placed the exclusive invitation on the conference table next to the flowchart. "Tomorrow night at 7, I said, "Mason and Olivia are hosting a lavish gala at the Oak Creek Country Club. They are celebrating the launch of the Delaware LLC and the purchase of their Dublin estate. Both the business and the house were funded by the stolen earnest money. Hector and Diane will be there. The entire extended family will be in attendance. It is a consolidated target environment." Jenkins stared at the gold lettering on the invitation. A slight predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a number. "Agent Miller," Jenkins said when the line connected. "This is ADA Jenkins from Franklin County. I am sitting here with Isabella Garcia. I believe we have a mutual interest in a coordinated strike tomorrow evening at the Oak Creek Country Club. I sat back in my chair and listened as the state prosecutor and the federal agent discussed logistics, jurisdiction parameters, and apprehension strategies. They debated the optimal timing to execute the warrants without endangering the civilian guests at the gala. They were planning a synchronized takedown, and my parents were completely unaware of the approaching storm. As the meeting concluded, Jenkins thanked me for compiling the evidence. She assured me the warrants would be signed by a judge first thing in the morning. I left the prosecutor's office and walked out into the bright Columbus sunlight. The heavy burden I had carried for the last 72 hours felt lighter. The legal machinery was in motion. I returned to my apartment and spent the afternoon finalizing the protection of Abuela Rosa's land. I contacted a specialized estate attorney and initiated the process to transfer the Hocking Hills deed into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. Once the paperwork cleared, the 40 acres would be shielded permanently. No forgery, no coercion, and no family manipulation could ever threaten the ancient oak trees again. My cell phone chimed, breaking my concentration. I picked it up, expecting another frantic voicemail from Hector or a threatening text from Diane. But the notification was a direct message from Olivia. I opened the text, bracing for another wave of entitlement. Instead, I found a photograph. Olivia had sent a selfie from the interior of an upscale boutique. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, wearing a stunning floor-length designer gown. The dress was a deep, shimmering sapphire blue, adorned with intricate beadwork that caught the boutique lighting. The price tag, conspicuously visible in the reflection, read $2,400. Below the photograph, Olivia had typed a single sentence: the gloat of a golden child who still believed she had won the war. I stared at the photograph glowing on my phone screen. The designer gown was a brilliant sapphire blue, stitched with hundreds of tiny glass beads that caught the bright lighting of the upscale boutique. The price tag dangled near Olivia's wrist, proudly displaying a $2,400 sum. Beneath the image, my sister had typed a message designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. Dad fixed the title issue, the text read. We close tomorrow. You could have been part of this family if you were not so bitter. Do not bother coming tonight. I read the words twice, analyzing the layers of deception woven into those 3 short sentences. Hector had not fixed the title issue. The list pendants remained firmly attached to the property records at the county courthouse. Titan Development was still preparing their breach of contract lawsuit. The $1.8 million wire was still frozen. My father was bleeding out financially, cornered by corporate lawyers and drowning in his own forged paperwork. Yet he had looked his golden child in the eye and lied. He told Olivia the problem was solved so she could enjoy her lavish country club gala without a shadow of worry. He was funding her fantasy right up until the final second, shielding her from the catastrophic reality he had created. Olivia truly believed she had won. She believed my silence over the last 24 hours was a surrender. I did not type a paragraph defending myself. I did not point out the logical flaws in her timeline. I opened the emoji keyboard, selected a simple thumbs up icon, and pressed send. It was the ultimate dismissal, a sterile acknowledgement from a person who no longer viewed her as a sibling, but as a target. I set the phone face down on my desk and turned my attention to the task at hand. The criminal indictments would punish my parents, but I needed a separate mechanism to protect the farmland. I opened a secure video conference with my newly retained estate attorney. We spent the next 3 hours finalizing the architecture of an irrevocable trust. An irrevocable trust is a legal fortress. Once an asset is transferred into its protection, the grantor relinquishes all ownership rights. The property belongs to the trust itself, managed by an independent trustee. It cannot be altered, amended, or dissolved without permission from the designated beneficiary. More importantly, it shields the asset from creditors, civil judgments, and fraudulent family members. The attorney shared his screen, walking me through the dense paragraphs of the finalized document. I reviewed the clauses, ensuring the timber could never be harvested for commercial gain and the acreage could never be subdivided. I provided my electronic signature on the final page, watching the digital notary seal lock the document into the state registry. The 40 acres and Hocking Hills were now untouchable. The ancient oak trees were safe. If Hector lost his insurance agency, if Titan Development sued my family into bankruptcy, the land would remain pristine and untouched. Abuela Rosa had trusted me to guard her sanctuary, and I had finally built a wall high enough to keep the predators out. I closed the laptop and walked into my bedroom to prepare for the evening. I bypassed the section of my closet holding cocktail dresses and evening gowns. I was not attending a celebration. I was delivering a verdict. I selected a charcoal gray tailored suit cut from heavy wool. The lines were sharp and structured. I paired it with a crisp white silk blouse and black leather pumps. I pulled my dark hair back into a tight, severe knot at the nape of my neck. I applied minimal makeup. I fastened a silver watch to my left wrist, the metal clasp clicking shut in the quiet room. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. I did not see a daughter. I did not see a sister. I saw a senior fraud investigator preparing to close a multi-jurisdictional. I returned to the home office and picked up the black leather binder. The portfolio felt heavy, weighted with the accumulated evidence of my family's greed. Inside were the flight manifests, the forged deed, the sworn notary confession, the elder abuse ledgers, the wire fraud flowcharts, and the digital drives containing the video and audio recordings. It was a portable archive of destruction. I walked out of my apartment, took the elevator to the parking garage, and slid behind the wheel of my sedan. The dashboard clock read 6:15. The gala was scheduled to begin at 7. Across town, the Oak Creek Country Club was already humming with orchestrated luxury. The venue sat at the end of a winding, manicured driveway lined with ancient elm trees. Valet attendants in crisp white uniforms jogged back and forth, opening the doors of imported luxury vehicles. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the polished hardwood dance floor. A 5-piece jazz band tuned their instruments on a raised stage. Waiters in black ties circulated through the growing crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with seared scallops and premium champagne flutes. Olivia stood near the grand entrance holding court. She wore the sapphire blue designer gown, the glass beads shimmering with every movement. She held a crystal flute in one hand and rested the other on Mason's arm. Mason wore a tailored tuxedo, projecting the aura of a visionary tech chief executive. They laughed loudly, greeting the local elite, the affluent neighbors, and the extended Garcia relatives who had arrived to witness their manufactured triumph. A few feet away, standing near the mahogany bar, Hector stared into a glass of watered-down scotch. His tuxedo jacket felt too tight around his shoulders. He pulled at his collar, a fine sheen of sweat gathering on his forehead. Every time the heavy ballroom doors opened, he flinched. He knew Titan Development was drafting a lawsuit. He knew the earnest money was gone. He knew I had the notary confession. He was standing inside a burning building, pretending the smoke was just ambiance. Diane stood beside him, adjusting her pearl necklace and smiling fiercely at anyone who made eye contact, desperately trying to hold the illusion together through sheer force of will. I merged onto the interstate, steering my sedan toward the affluent northern suburbs. The sun had dipped below the horizon, replacing the daylight with the harsh glare of halogen street lamps. The rhythmic hum of my tires against the asphalt provided a steady, calming cadence. I kept the speedometer pinned exactly to the posted limit. I glanced into my rearview mirror. 2 car lengths behind me, traveling in perfect synchronization, were 2 black Ford Tauruses. They were unmarked vehicles, stripped of any chrome trim or identifying dealership decals. They possessed heavy tinted windows and dark, reinforced grilles. To the average commuter, they were just standard sedans navigating the evening traffic. To someone trained in law enforcement protocols, they were screaming their identity. The vehicle directly behind me contained 2 plainclothes federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division, dispatched by Special Agent Miller. The vehicle trailing them held 2 uniformed officers from the Franklin County Warrants Division, coordinated by the Assistant District Attorney. They were pacing me. We had established a precise operational timeline. I was the designated forward element. I would enter the venue, identify the targets, and deliver the final documentation, ensuring the suspects were consolidated in a single location. The apprehension teams would follow 90 seconds behind, securing the exits and executing the arrest warrants. I took the designated highway exit, the tires of my sedan gripping the curved asphalt. The two dark vehicles followed their headlights, tracking my path with mechanical precision. We turned onto the long tree-lined road leading to the Oak Creek Country Club. The tension in the air was thick, carrying the electric charge of an approaching storm. Olivia was raising her glass for a toast. Mason was preparing to deliver a speech about his revolutionary new business. Diane was mingling with the country club board members, cementing her social status. Hector was praying for a miracle that would never arrive. They had built a glittering, expensive fortress on a foundation of stolen money and forged signatures. They had invited 100 guests to witness their elevation to the upper echelon of local society. I steered my vehicle past the stone pillars of the country club entrance, my leather binder resting securely on the passenger seat. I followed the curve of the driveway, the dual headlights of the federal agents illuminating the rear window of my car. The music from the ballroom drifted out into the cool night air. The celebration was in full swing, and the executioners had just arrived. I pulled my sedan up to the circular stone driveway of the Oak Creek Country Club. A valet attendant in a pristine white uniform stepped forward, opening my car door with a practiced, deferential nod. I handed him the keys, retrieved the black leather binder from the passenger seat, and turned toward the grand entrance. The building was a sprawling Tudor-style mansion, constructed from dark brick and heavy timber. Warm golden light spilled from the towering arched windows, cutting through the chill of the evening air. I walked up the wide stone steps and pulled open the heavy brass doors. The foyer was a cathedral of unearned luxury. The air was thick with the scent of roasted beef tenderloin, expensive vanilla candles, and fine imported champagne. In the center of the grand entryway stood a towering ice sculpture, carved into the shape of a soaring eagle. As the ambient heat of the crowded room washed over it, drops of melted water fell in a steady, rhythmic cadence into a silver basin below. Beyond the foyer, the main ballroom was alive with the sound of a 5-piece jazz band playing a brisk, upbeat tempo. The upright bass provided a deep, thumping pulse, while a saxophone wove a bright melody over the chatter of 100 affluent guests. These were the local elite, the country club board members, the suburban politicians, and the wealthy neighbors. They wore tailored tuxedos and glittering evening gowns, holding crystal flutes and discussing their investment portfolios. They were entirely oblivious to the reality that the entire event was funded by stolen capital. I stepped onto the plush, burgundy carpet of the ballroom. In a sea of vibrant silks, shimmering sequins, and velvet lapels, my severe charcoal wool suit stood out like a sharp, dark blade. I did not stop at the coat check. I did not pause to accept a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I walked slowly and deliberately through the outer ring of the crowd. The shift in the room was not immediate, but it was palpable, moving outward like ripples in a pond. The guests nearest to me stopped talking. They noticed the rigid posture, the lack of a smile, and the heavy leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. The silence began to spread. Aunt Elena, standing near a towering floral arrangement of white orchids, froze mid-sentence. She lowered her wineglass, her eyes widening as she recognized me. Uncle Carlos saw me a second later and turned his back, suddenly fascinated by the architecture of the ceiling. They remembered the video camera in my kitchen. They wanted no part of the impending collision. From across the ballroom, a flash of champagne-colored silk caught my eye. My mother had spotted me. Diane was standing with the club president, projecting the image of the perfect, generous matriarch. The moment her eyes locked onto my gray suit, the manufactured warmth vanished from her face. Her jaw tightened, pulling the skin taut across her cheekbones. She excused herself with a tight, breathless laugh and began marching toward me, weaving urgently through the clusters of guests. I kept my pace steady, moving deeper into the ballroom. Diane intercepted me near a marble pillar, far enough from the center of the room to avoid immediate eavesdropping. She blocked my path, stepping dangerously close. The heavy gardenia perfume she wore was overpowering, failing to mask the sour scent of her own panic.
"What are you doing here?" Diane hissed,
her voice a strained, desperate whisper. Her mouth smiled for the benefit of the passing waiters, but her eyes were cold and frantic. "I told you this was a private event. You are not going to ruin Olivia's night. Turn around and walk out those doors right now." I did not break my stride. I merely sidestepped her, forcing her to pivot and follow me. "I am not here to ruin the night, Mom," I replied, my voice carrying the calm, sterile cadence of a bank lobby. "I am here to deliver the closing documents." Diane faltered, her high heels catching slightly on the thick carpet. The words confused her. She looked at the heavy leather binder under my arm. For a fleeting second, a spark of dangerous hope ignited in her expression. She actually believed the fake intervention had worked. She believed the sheer social pressure had broken my resolve, and I was arriving in secret to hand over the signed quitclaim deed to save the family from the Titan Development lawsuit. As I moved past the dance floor, I saw my father. Hector was standing near the edge of the raised dais that held the main reserve table. The contrast between my father and the other men in the room was stark. The wealthy neighbors looked relaxed, their tuxedo jackets hanging effortlessly from their shoulders. Hector looked like a man standing on a trap door with a rope around his neck. His skin was the color of wet ash. A fine, glittering layer of sweat coated his forehead, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He held a glass of scotch, his knuckles white from the force of his grip. Hector knew the truth. He knew the title was not clear. He knew the $1.8 million wire was paralyzed. He had lied to Mason and Olivia that morning, assuring them the banking glitch was resolved, because he lacked the courage to look his golden child in the eye and admit he had failed. He had allowed them to host this extravagant gala under the false pretense of victory. Hector saw the leather binder. He did not share my mother's foolish hope. He knew exactly what kind of documents I was carrying. His mouth opened, but his throat was too dry to produce a sound. The glass in his hand shook, the ice cubes rattling a frantic warning against the crystal rim. I bypassed Hector and walked directly up the two carpeted steps to the main reserve table. Olivia was sitting in the center chair, radiating triumph. The sapphire blue designer gown draped perfectly across her shoulders. She was laughing at a joke made by one of Mason's supposed investors. Mason stood beside her chair, holding a microphone in one hand and a fresh glass of champagne in the other. He was preparing to step onto the stage and deliver his startup launch speech. He wore a custom velvet dinner jacket, his posture loose and arrogant, built on the confidence of a man who believed he had successfully laundered $80,000. Mason noticed me approaching. He lowered the microphone. He had heard the frantic voicemails Hector left. He knew about the Titan Development ultimatum. Seeing me approach with a professional portfolio, Mason drew the same incorrect conclusion as Diane. He assumed I was the defeated sibling arriving to surrender the property rights so the corporate wire could finally clear. Mason smiled. It was a broad, shark-like grin, full of teeth and unearned superiority. He handed his champagne flute to Olivia and stepped forward to meet me at the edge of the table. "Isabella Mason," said his voice loud enough for the immediate guests to hear. "We were not expecting you, but I am glad you decided to do the right thing and support the family." He extended his right hand, palm up, expecting me to place a single sheet of paper into his fingers. He expected the quitclaim deed. I unclasped the black leather binder. The heavy steel rings clicked loudly. I did not hand him a property deed. I reached past the notary confession and the flight manifests. I retrieved two specific, high-gloss documents. The first was the color-coded flowchart detailing the exact movement of the Titan Development earnest money across state lines. The second was the bank ledger from Abuela Rosa's home equity line of credit, showing the $150,000 lump sum transfer. I placed both documents directly into Mason's open palm. "These are the foundational ledgers for Nexus Solutions," I stated, keeping my voice level and precise. Mason looked down at the gloss paper. He expected legal jargon regarding an Ohio land parcel. Instead, his eyes tracked the thick black arrow on the flowchart. He saw the box labeled Titan Development. He saw the line crossing the state border. He saw the name of his own Delaware LLC printed in bold ink. Then he looked at the second page. He saw the routing numbers from Rosa's home equity line. The transaction of comprehension is a physical process. The human brain requires a few seconds to process catastrophic data, but the body reacts instantly. The arrogant grin vanished from Mason's face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of profound terror. The blood drained out of his cheeks, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent white. His fingers began to tremble, the heavy gloss paper shaking like leaves in a sudden wind. Mason possessed a degree in business marketing. He understood corporate structures. He knew that crossing a state border with stolen commercial funds was the exact legal definition of federal wire fraud. He knew that the paper he was holding was a schematic for a federal indictment. The jazz band on the stage behind us transitioned into a bright, energetic brass solo. The upbeat music soared over the crowd, filling the ballroom with celebratory noise. But at the main reserve table, a localized vacuum had formed. The air grew still and suffocating. Olivia looked up at her husband, her brow furrowing in confusion. She did not understand the paperwork. She only saw the color vanish from Mason's face. "Mason," she asked, her voice faltering, "what is it? What did she bring?" Mason could not answer. He stared at the flowchart, his breathing shallow and rapid. Hector stood frozen at the bottom of the dais steps, clutching his scotch, knowing his lies had just collided with reality. Diane rushed up behind me, breathless from her sprint across the room, her hands hovering in the air as if she could physically push the documents back into the binder. The trap had snapped shut. The music continued to play, mocking the silent, escalating panic radiating from the head table. I stood perfectly still, my posture flawless, waiting for them to fully absorb the weight of the evidence before I delivered the final summary to the rest of the room. Olivia moved first. The confusion on her face morphed into a sudden, defensive anger. She reached out and snatched the glossy documents directly from Mason's trembling hand. The harsh rustle of the thick paper cut through the ambient noise of the nearby tables. Olivia stared at the flowchart. Her eyes darted across the red outlines and the black arrows. Unlike Mason, she did not possess the financial literacy to immediately decode a corporate wire structure. She saw her husband's LLC and Titan Development, but she lacked the operational context. To her, it was just a confusing grid of boxes and numbers. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice sharp and petulant. She looked from the paper to Mason, then directed her glare at me. "What kind of stunt are you pulling, Isabella? Dad said the banking error was fixed." I did not raise my volume to match her shrill tone. I utilized the same low, penetrating cadence I used when presenting evidence in a deposition. When you speak quietly, people lean in to listen, and I wanted the surrounding tables to hear every single syllable. "There was no banking error, Olivia," I stated, enunciating the words with brutal mathematical precision. "Your father forged my signature on October 12th to sell Abuela Rosa's 40-acre farm for $1.8 million. He coerced Brenda into applying a fake notary stamp while I was 300 miles away in Chicago." A sharp intake of breath came from a woman sitting at the nearest table. The clinking of silverware against porcelain abruptly stopped in our immediate vicinity. The silence began to ripple outward, table by table, as the surrounding guests tuned into the confrontation at the dais. Olivia scoffed an ugly, dismissive sound. She shook her head, the heavy glass beads on her designer gown catching the light. "You are lying. You are just trying to ruin my housewarming because you are miserable. I am explaining the math that paid for that dress," I replied, my gaze locked onto hers. "Because the $1.8 million wire never cleared. I froze the escrow account. But Titan Development was so eager to buy the land, they sent Dad a non-refundable earnest money deposit of $100,000 a week ago. Dad accepted it, using the forged deed. Then he wired $80,000 of those stolen corporate funds across the state line to Mason's Delaware holding company." I pointed a single finger at the second document clutched in her hand. "And that ledger beneath it? I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. That is the $150,000 home equity line of credit Hector and Diane took out on Abuela Rosa's house 6 months before she died. They told us it was for nursing care, but the money went straight into Mason's failing LLC. You bought your Tesla with the equity our grandmother needed to pay for her heart medication. Olivia went perfectly still. The arrogant dismissal vanished from her posture. She looked down at the routing numbers, the realization finally connecting the dates and the dollars. She looked at Mason, searching his face for a denial, an excuse, a lie. But Mason was staring at the floor, his jaw clenched, unable to meet his wife's eyes. He could not defend himself against the banking ledgers. The evidence was absolute. The silence had now consumed a quarter of the ballroom. The jazz band was still playing on the stage, the saxophone weaving a bright melody, but the guests near the head table were frozen, watching the wealthy facade of the Garcia family disintegrate in real time. Hector lurched forward from the bottom of the steps. The fine sheen of sweat on his forehead had turned into heavy droplets. He moved with a clumsy, desperate speed, his polished dress shoes slipping slightly on the carpet. He reached out with both hands, lunging toward the black leather binder tucked under my arm, attempting to physically seize the evidence. I took one smooth step backward. His hands grasped empty air. He stumbled, his balance failing, and he caught himself against the edge of the heavy banquet table. "Do not touch my property, Hector," I warned, my tone dropping into a cold, dangerous register. Hector gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. "Isabella, stop this," he gasped, the words tearing out of his throat. "Please, I fixed it. I told Titan Development we cleared the title defect today. I told their lawyers you signed the release." "You lied to their lawyers, Dad," I corrected him. "I did not sign a release. I transferred the deed into an irrevocable trust this afternoon. The land is permanently shielded." I also handed Brenda's sworn confession directly to the Apex Title Legal Department. Hector's eyes widened, the pupils contracting to pinpricks. The remaining color drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. "The deal is dead," Hector, I stated, driving the final, lethal truth into the open air. "The $1.8 million is gone, and Titan Development is drafting a lawsuit as we speak. They want their $100,000 deposit returned by tomorrow morning. A deposit you have already spent." The structural integrity of Hector's reality collapsed. His legs gave out beneath him. He did not fall gracefully. He crumpled his body, folding as he dropped heavily into the nearest bead banquet chair. The scotch glass slipped from his fingers, tumbling to the carpet. The amber liquid seeped into the burgundy fibers, a dark, spreading stain. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, ragged sobs. Diane had watched the destruction from 3 feet away. Her initial plan to quietly usher me out of the ballroom had failed. Her husband was weeping in a chair, her son-in-law was paralyzed with fear, and the guests she so desperately wanted to impress were watching the spectacle with horrified fascination. When a manipulator loses control of the narrative, they do not accept defeat. They escalate the volume. They attempt to drown the facts in a wave of manufactured hysteria. Diane stepped around the table, positioning herself between me and the crowd. She threw her arms wide, her face contorting into a mask of pure theatrical outrage. "She is a liar," Diane screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged, shattering the last remnants of civility in the ballroom. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest. "Do not listen to her. She is mentally unstable. She has been trying to extort us for weeks. She forged those documents herself. She is trying to destroy her sister because she is bitter and alone. Somebody call security. Get this psychotic woman out of my party." She scanned the crowd, her eyes wide and pleading, searching for an ally. She looked for Aunt Elena, for Uncle Carlos, for the country club president. She expected the audience to rally to her defense, to comfort the grieving matriarch and expel the wicked daughter. But nobody moved. Nobody offered a comforting word. The wealthy guests merely stared, their expressions a mix of disgust and pity. They saw Hector weeping in the chair. They saw Mason trembling. They saw the clinical documented proof resting in Olivia's hands. Diane was screaming into a void. The illusion was shattered, and no amount of volume could piece it back together. I did not argue with my mother. I did not raise my voice to defend my sanity. I stood perfectly composed, holding the leather binder against my side. I allowed her to scream, allowing her to broadcast her desperation to the entire room. When Diane paused to draw a ragged breath, preparing to launch into another hysterical accusation, I raised my right hand. I did not point at the documents. I did not point at Hector or Mason. I extended my arm and pointed a single finger toward the heavy brass doors at the main entrance of the ballroom. Diane turned her head, following the trajectory of my hand. Olivia and Mason turned to look. The guests standing near the foyer shifted their gaze. The heavy brass doors swung open. The orchestrated luxury of the Oak Creek Country Club was about to collide with the uncompromising reality of the federal justice system. The heavy brass doors at the main entrance did not simply swing open. They were pushed wide by hands accustomed to breaching restricted spaces. The polished mahogany and glittering chandeliers of the Oak Creek Country Club offered zero resistance to the realities spilling into the foyer. 4 uniformed officers from the Franklin County Sheriff's Department stepped over the threshold. Their dark olive tactical uniforms, Kevlar vests, and duty belts weighed down with steel batons and heavy radios created a jarring visual contrast against the backdrop of imported ice sculptures and pastel floral arrangements. Flanking the uniformed officers were 2 plainclothes federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division. The jazz band playing on the raised stage was the first to register the intrusion. The upright bass player saw the tactical uniforms reflecting in the mirrored walls. His fingers faltered on the thick strings, producing a dull, discordant thud. The drummer ceased his rhythmic brushwork on the snare. The saxophone player caught mid-breath, lowered his brass instrument, the wooden reed squeaking into a sudden, awkward silence. The absence of music acted as a vacuum, sucking the ambient chatter out of the ballroom. 100 affluent guests, individuals accustomed to unyielding deference and societal privilege, turned toward the entrance. When they recognized the silver shields clipped to the belts of the approaching personnel, the crowd physically recoiled. They stepped backward, pulling their silk gowns and tailored tuxedo jackets away from the center of the room. The local politicians, the wealthy neighbors, and the country club board members parted like water, forming a wide, unobstructed aisle directly down the middle of the polished hardwood dance floor. Special Agent David Miller led the formation. He wore a simple, unbranded gray suit, carrying a standard manila folder containing the signed judicial warrants. He did not run. He did not shout orders. He walked with the measured, unhurried cadence of a man who possessed unquestionable authority. The heavy scuff of tactical boots against the plush burgundy carpet echoed through the hushed ballroom, each footstep counting down the final seconds of the Garcia family illusion. Miller bypassed the whispering guests. He ignored the towering centerpieces and the trays of abandoned champagne. He marched straight toward the main reserve table where I stood. He stopped at the edge of the dais, his eyes scanning the faces of the individuals paralyzed before him. He referenced the photograph in his open folder, then locked his gaze onto my brother-in-law. Mason stood frozen still, clutching the glossy flowchart I had handed him moments earlier. The arrogant tech visionary persona he had cultivated for years evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, hollow shell. Miller stepped onto the dais. Mason, Special Agent Miller, stated, his voice projecting clearly across the breathless room. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit interstate wire fraud and the receipt of stolen corporate funds. 2 uniformed officers flanked Mason immediately. They grabbed his arms, spinning him around to face the wall. Mason did not struggle. His muscles went entirely limp, his body offering zero physical resistance. The officer forced his wrists together behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of the steel handcuffs clicking into place severed the quiet tension in the room. The sound was definitive. It was the mechanical period at the end of a long, fraudulent sentence. The metallic click broke Olivia from her state of shock. She looked at her husband, now restrained in steel, his custom velvet dinner jacket bunching awkwardly around his shoulders. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers. It hit the polished hardwood floor, shattering into a dozen glittering fragments, scattering sharp shards over the toes of her expensive shoes. She collapsed to her knees, clutching the sapphire blue fabric of her $2,400 gown. A high-pitched guttural wail tore from her throat, a sound stripped of all entitlement and reduced to pure, agonizing panic. While the federal agents secured Mason, the remaining 2 Franklin County officers approached Hector. My father was still slumped in the padded banquet chair, his head buried in his hands, the dark stain of spilled scotch soaking into the carpet beneath his shoes. An officer placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stand. Hector Garcia, the county officer announced, reciting the state charges with clinical detachment. You are under arrest for felony forgery, grand theft, and the financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Hector did not look at the officers. He did not look at his weeping daughter on the floor. And he refused to look at me. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, tears leaking through his eyelashes, as he surrendered his wrists. A second pair of steel cuffs ratcheted shut. The patriarch who had forged my name to fund his favorite child was now bound, his reputation dismantled, in front of the exact audience he had tried so desperately to impress. Diane could not process the collapse of her kingdom. Her mind, built entirely on social currency and visual perception, rejected the reality of the handcuffs. She lunged forward, her pearl necklace bouncing against her collarbone. She reached out her manicured fingers, grabbing the dark sleeve of the officer holding Hector. "Stop this!" Diane shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "You cannot do this to us. Do you know who we are? Let him go right now." The officer did not flinch. He did not negotiate. He turned his head and leveled a cold, unyielding stare directly into Diane's eyes. "Ma'am," the officer warned, his tone vibrating with legal consequence, "remove your hand from my uniform and step back immediately. If you interfere with this apprehension for one more second, you will be placed in restraints and charged with the obstruction of a federal investigation." Diane recoiled as if she had touched a live electrical wire. She snatched her hand back, pressing it against her own mouth to stifle a sob. She looked around the ballroom, her eyes darting frantically toward the crowd. She searched for her bridge partners, her country club associates, her siblings. She was looking for someone to intervene, someone to validate her victimhood. I followed her gaze toward the crowd. Standing near the edge of the dance floor, illuminated by the golden light of the chandeliers, were Aunt Elena, Uncle Carlos, and Cousin Maria, the relatives who had bombarded my phone with venomous texts demanding I apologize and surrender my property. They were not typing insults now. They were staring at Hector and Mason in handcuffs. The horror of realization was etched deeply into their features. They finally understood the true scale of the crimes they had blindly supported. When Diane made eye contact with Carlos, my uncle looked away, lowering his head in shame. Nobody was coming to save her. Special Agent Miller read the Miranda rights in a steady, monotonous drone. The officers gripped the elbows of the 2 restrained men and began marching them toward the exit. The crowd parted once again, giving the law enforcement personnel a wide berth. Hector dragged his feet, his head bowed, a broken man shuffling through the wreckage of his own design. Mason kept his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding the stares of the wealthy investors he had tried to swindle. I remained standing near the reserve table. I did not smile. I did not offer a parting insult. The mathematics of justice require no emotional embellishment. I had balanced the ledger. I watched the parents who had handed me an empty inheritance, who had conspired to steal my only asset, be let out in public disgrace. I reached down and picked up my black leather binder from the table. I brushed a speck of dust from the lapel of my charcoal suit, adjusted my cuffs, and turned toward the exit. I walked down the same aisle the officers had used. The silence in the room was unbroken, save for the muffled weeping of my sister, still crumpled on the floor behind me. The guests watched me pass. They saw the posture of a woman who had refused to be a victim, who had utilized her intellect and her boundaries to protect her grandmother's legacy. I pushed open the heavy brass doors and stepped out into the cool, crisp Ohio night. The flashing red and blue lights of the cruisers parked in the circular driveway painted the stone columns with a vibrant, rhythmic pulse. I walked down the steps, my dignity intact, breathing in the clean air, leaving the rot of my family entirely behind me. 6 months passed. The transition from autumn to spring in Ohio brought a thaw to the frozen ground, but the frost surrounding the Garcia family tree was permanent. I sat at my kitchen island on a quiet Tuesday evening reviewing the final disposition reports forwarded by the district attorney. The mathematics of justice are thorough. They do not leave loose ends. Over the past 24 weeks, the automated phone system at the Franklin County Correctional Facility had dialed my cell phone number 47 times. Each time, the recorded voice asked if I would accept a collect call from an inmate. I pressed the red button to disconnect. I did not owe them an audience. I owed them accountability, and the legal system had delivered it in exact, measurable increments. Hector Garcia stood before a county judge in late February. He wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely off his shoulders, his former country club swagger erased by the stark reality of the penal system. Faced with the flawless paper trail, the biometric data, and Brenda the notary testifying against him, for a reduced sentence, his public defender advised him to avoid a trial. Hector accepted a plea agreement. He was sentenced to 4 years in a state penitentiary for the forgery and elder financial exploitation. Mason faced a separate, sharper blade. The federal wire fraud charges triggered a multi-agency audit. The Securities and Exchange Commission seized the assets of Nexus Solutions, uncovering a deeper web of investor misrepresentation. Desperate to avoid a decade behind bars, Mason turned state evidence, offering a guilty plea in exchange for a 36-month federal sentence. His luxury vehicles were auctioned by the government. His tech visionary persona dissolved into a digital footnote in a federal ledger. The golden child, who once boasted about generational wealth, experienced the fastest descent. Olivia had signed her name to the Dublin estate contract, knowing the funds were acquired through deception. That signature earned her accessory charges. To avoid a prison cell, she agreed to a ruinous financial settlement with the state. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in March. The sapphire blue designer gown with the glass beads was seized by creditors, along with the luxury handbags and the imported jewelry she loved to flaunt. Today, my younger sister rents a cramped 300-square-foot studio apartment situated above a noisy laundromat in a deteriorating neighborhood. She works 38 hours a week, scanning barcodes at a big-box retail store. Her hands, once adorned with expensive manicures, now bear the paper cuts and dry skin of a minimum-wage clerk. She spends her breaks sitting in a break room, smelling of stale coffee, scrolling through social media, watching other people live the life she thought she could steal. My mother suffered the ultimate social execution. When the $1.8 million property deal collapsed, Titan Development executed their threat. Their corporate attorneys sued Hector and Diane for breach of contract, demanding the immediate repayment of the $100,000 earnest money deposit, plus legal fees. The court placed a lien on my parents' suburban home. Diane could not produce the capital. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. She watched strangers carry her antique furniture out to the curb. Stripped of her assets and her status, Diane had nowhere else to go. She packed her remaining clothes into cardboard boxes and moved into the spare bedroom of Aunt Elena. She now lives under the roof of the exact relatives she had tried to manipulate during the fake intervention. Elena and Carlos know the truth. They know Diane attempted to extort her own daughter to cover a felony. They offer her a bed, but they do not offer her respect. Diane lives in a perpetual state of quiet humiliation, eating dinner in a house where her voice carries no weight and her opinions are ignored. With the ledgers balanced and the threats neutralized, I scheduled a week of personal leave from the bank. I packed a small overnight bag, climbed into my sedan, and drove south on Route 33. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and blooming dogwood trees. The tires hummed against the asphalt, leaving the concrete skyline of Columbus far behind in the rearview mirror. I turned onto the familiar gravel access road, the stones crunching steadily beneath the wheels. There were no bulldozers waiting at the tree line. There were no orange plastic ribbons marking the timber for destruction. I parked my car near the edge of the property and stepped out into the quiet forest. I walked deep into the 40 acres. The ancient oak trees towered overhead, their thick branches forming a canopy of vibrant green against the bright spring sky. I stopped near a limestone creek, the clear water rushing over smooth gray stones. I knelt down and pressed the palm of my hand flat against the damp earth. The ground felt solid, permanent, and safe. Abuela Rosa had trusted me to protect her sanctuary. I had kept my promise. The deed rested securely inside an irrevocable trust, shielding the timber from any future predators. The land belonged to the trees, the wind, and the memory of the woman who bought it. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my hands, and looked out across the expansive, untouched horizon. Some people believe that sharing a bloodline requires you to endure endless mistreatment. They tell you to forgive the unforgivable to keep the peace, and to sacrifice your own security to protect the fragile egos of the people who raised you. They weaponize guilt to keep you compliant. But family is not defined by shared genetics. Family isn't the people who forge your name to fund their favorites. Family is the peace you protect with your own two hands. It is the life you build through hard work, the boundaries you enforce, and the quiet dignity of walking away from a burning bridge without looking back. If you are watching this video and you are currently holding the weight of your family's toxicity, this is your permission to set the burden down. Stop lighting yourself on fire to keep your manipulators warm. Build your binder, gather your evidence, set ironclad boundaries, and protect your own 40 acres, whatever that looks like for you. Thank you for listening to my story here on Vega Vengeance. Drop a comment below to let me know you are choosing yourself today. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. When the steel doors of a county correctional facility slide shut, the sound echoes far beyond the concrete walls. It reverberates backward through time, vibrating through decades of family dinners, holiday mornings, and quiet moments spent in suburban living rooms. Hector and Diane Garcia did not destroy their family in a single afternoon with a forged signature on a warranty deed. The collapse of their family was orchestrated slowly, year after year, choice by choice, inside the walls of a traditional American home. The tragedy of the Garcia family is not merely a story about a stolen farm, a corporate real estate developer, or federal wire fraud. It is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of parenting. It asks us to examine the terrifying cost of conditional love and the devastating multi-generational consequences of favoritism. We live in a culture that often equates parental success with the visible, material prosperity of our children. We want to give them the world. We want them to achieve the American dream of home ownership, financial stability, and social respect. But there is a profound and dangerous difference between guiding a child towards success and manufacturing an artificial illusion of achievement for them. Diane and Hector believed they were fulfilling their family responsibility by subsidizing Olivia. They bought into the toxic myth that protecting a child from struggle is the highest form of love. Instead, they completely crippled her. By constantly shielding Olivia from the natural consequences of her own financial choices, they denied her the opportunity to develop any genuine resilience. They handed her a life built on a fragile, hollow foundation of stolen equity and deceit. And in their desperate pursuit to elevate one daughter, they fundamentally abandoned the other. When parents play favorites, they plant the seeds of resentment that will eventually choke the entire family tree. Hector and Diane looked at Isabella, saw her strength, her intelligence, and her self-reliance, and decided she no longer required their honesty or their protection. They mistook her competence for invulnerability. This is a common failure in traditional family structures where emotional awareness is lacking. Parents often punish the strong child by demanding endless understanding while simultaneously rewarding the weak child by lowering all expectations. True family responsibility means holding all your children accountable. It means allowing them to fail, allowing them to feel the sting of disappointment and standing beside them as they learn to rebuild their own lives through their own effort. Hector and Diane absolutely refused to let Olivia fail. They chose to commit a state felony rather than look their golden child in the eye and simply say the word no. That inability to set a firm parental boundary did not save Olivia in the long run. It bankrupted her. It left her scanning barcodes in a retail store entirely unequipped to survive the harsh realities of the real world because her parents never taught her how to stand on her own 2 feet. They taught her that the rules did not apply to her, and the federal justice system had to step in to teach her the lesson her parents actively avoided. And what of the strong child? What of the daughter who did everything right, who built a successful career, and who respected the legacy of her grandmother? The emotional damage inflicted upon the family's scapegoat is a quiet, invisible wound. Isabella was forced to become her own protector because the architects of her family decided she was merely a resource to be harvested. Parenting is not supposed to be a ledger where the strong subsidize the weak. It is a sacred contract of equal respect and unwavering honesty. When parents violate that contract, they sever the most fundamental bond of trust a human being can experience. The cultural narrative often celebrates the self-made individual, but it rarely discusses the deep psychological trauma required to build that independence when your own parents are actively trying to tear you down. Isabella saved the 40 acres of ancient oak trees, but she had to orphan herself to do it. We must ask ourselves what kind of legacy we are truly leaving for the next generation. Are we raising adults who understand the value of honest labor, who respect the personal boundaries of others, and who know that true wealth is measured in integrity rather than square footage? Or are we raising entitled adults who believe they have a right to the harvest of someone else's hard work? The way we answer that question determines the future of our families. We must foster deep emotional awareness within our homes. We must teach our children that fairness is not about everyone getting exactly the same material possessions, but about everyone being treated with the same fundamental truth and respect. A parent must be a guide, not a financial shield. A family must be a sanctuary of honesty, not a syndicate of enablers. If this reflection resonates with the quiet, unspoken struggles in your own life, you are in the right place. If you have ever had to build your own safe haven because the people who were supposed to protect you handed you an empty life instead, you are not alone. Please subscribe and follow the channel Vega Vengeance. We share these stories because shining a bright light on the truth is the very first step toward healing from family trauma. Leave a comment below and share your own journey of setting healthy boundaries and reclaiming your peace from toxic dynamics. Your voice might be the exact validation someone else needs to hear today. The 40 acres in Hocking Hills stand quiet today. The wind moves through the branches of the ancient oak trees untroubled by the greed and the frantic panic that once tried to consume them. But back in the affluent suburbs, there are empty chairs at a dining room table. There are silent holidays and unanswered phone calls echoing in a small apartment. The sprawling house that Hector and Diane tried so desperately to save is now occupied by strangers. The choices we make as parents cast long, unavoidable shadows over the lives of the people we bring into this world. We build the future of our children with every truth we tell and every lie we excuse. We are left to wonder about the spaces between the words we say to the people we claim to love. Sometimes the most terrifying question a parent can ask themselves in the quiet, lonely hours of the night is not whether they love their children enough, but whether they love them right. And when you look across your own kitchen table at the faces of the people you are raising, you have to ask yourself what kind of foundation you are laying beneath their feet. Is it solid stone, or is it just shifting sand waiting for the tide to pull it all away?